Chapter 1533, Supreme Attribute. When world projection took effect, the injured orcs were weakened once more. The Great Lord and Grand Lord ranked orcs promptly lost 20% of their basic attributes, while the Orc Warlord lost 10%. Although it was only a 10% decrease, the Orc Warlord had a maximum HP of 400 million. A loss of 40 million HP alleviated a significant portion of the pressure the team faced. Moreover, the orcs did not merely lose HP. Their strength and agility had decreased as well. With the orcs' injuries, Solitary 9 and Dark Madness, who were still Tier 1 players, could easily take on an orc captain by themselves. Although the team's other MTs had lower attributes and weaker techniques than Solitary 9 and Dark Madness, they could still deal with the surviving orc warriors. When they blocked attacks, they only lost around 4,000 HP. To the MTs, who had over 45,000 HP on average, this amount of damage wasn't a threat. As everyone thought that victory was within their reach, a blinding light illuminated the area. Kola, who had been charging towards the Orc Warlord, flew backward over 20 yards, crashing into the ground. His HP fell rapidly, only stopping when it was close to the 50% threshold. At the same time, a damage of over -30,000 appeared above his head, stupefying his companions. "Isn't this mythic orc a little too strong?" Blackie exclaimed. Despite its injuries and world projection suppression, the Orc Warlord could still destroy half of Kola's HP in a single attack. If the Orc Warlord were at its peak, wouldn't it kill the expert MT in one hit? Before anyone could react, the Orc Warlord appeared before Kola and swung down its massive saber, giving the Guardian Knight no time to catch his breath. "Don't think I'm that easy to get rid of." Kola, who had just stood back up, shifted his shield before him and activated Protection Blessing. Boom. Kola was struck once again. This time, however, he was only forced back several steps and managed to stabilize his stance. His HP only fell by a little over 17,000. Seeing the MT still standing, the Orc Warlord swung its saber a second time. Just before the weapon struck Kola, however, a pale golden glow enveloped the Guardian Knight. This was none other than Violet Cloud's Tier 2 healing spell, Advanced Heal. Instantly, Kola received over 24,000 HP, providing enough to endure another blow. "Guild leader, we can't continue the raid like this. The Orc Warlord's damage and speed are too high. Even if Kola activates his life-saving skill, he won't be able to hold on for very long." Aqua Rose expressed her concern as she watched Kola, whose life hung on by a thread. The Orc Warlord could already deal over -17,000 damage with a normal attack. When it used a skill, it would devour nearly 40,000 of Kola's HP. If not for Protection Blessing, Kola would have died. Even Lifeless Thorn and the other Azura members, who had raided a mythic boss before, paled when they saw the Orc Warlord's frightening damage. They had been excited to take on another mythic boss, but after meeting this one, they were reminded of how powerful such monsters were. Their victory over the Titan Warrior had been a miracle. Moreover, the Orc Warlord was different from the Titan Warrior. The Titan Warrior had been a mechanical lifeform, so its reactions had been slower. In return, though, its defense and magic resistance had been extraordinary. On the other hand, the Orc Warlord was a creature of flesh and blood. Although it did not have a specific strength like the Titan Warrior, it didn't have any apparent weaknesses. A mythic boss with no weaknesses was not a foe for current players. It might be possible to defeat one with an army of tens of thousands, but it was beyond a 1,000-man team. The Titan Guard's effects are really impressive. In contrast, Feng nodded in satisfaction as he watched Kola's HP rise and fall. Immediately, he took out the Bible of Darkness and summoned a Tier 3 demon. He wouldn't have dared to provoke a mythic boss on Thunder Island, but he had plenty of tools he could use here. He was fully aware of how terrifying the Orc Warlord was. He had simply sent Kola to intercept the boss alone to see how far the Guardian Knight could go with the Titan Guard. The results had exceeded his expectations. If any other Tier 2 metric tons stood in Kola's place, one of the Orc Warlord's normal attacks would likely kill them instantly. Even if they survived, they wouldn't have much HP left. In the next moment, a level 75 Tier 3 Red Demon emerged from the gates before Feng. Due to Demon Ruler's buff, the Red Demon's maximum HP rose to 27 million. Kola, coordinate with the Red Demon to distract the Orc Warlord. Everyone else, clear out the other orcs. Feng commanded. With the Red Demon splitting the Orc Warlord's damage, the pressure Kola faced decreased significantly. The healers also had an easier time keeping Kola's MT above a safe threshold. The rest of the team, in response to Feng's command, kept their guard up as they bombarded the rest of the orcs. Although the orc warriors were great lords, their injuries and the suppression dropped their overall combat power to below a grand lords of the same level. Even a team of Zero Wings elite members could deal with them now. In less than 10 minutes, all surviving orc warriors died, and the 4 orc captains were little more than flickering candlelight in the wind. It was only a matter of time before they fell as well. However, when the orc captains were nearly dead, the sound of a war horn echoed throughout the forest. What? There are reinforcements. Blackie's expression darkened when he noticed a small orc army emerge from the nearby forest. Although there weren't as many incoming orcs as there were in the army sieging bewildering forest town, there were several thousand. A level 65 orc general lead the small force. Orc general, humanoid creature, mythic. Level 65. HP 330, 000, 000/330, 000, 000. Is this a joke? We're doomed? How is there another mythic boss? Everyone was speechless when they saw the approaching orc general. The orc warlord was enough of a problem, yet now they had to deal with a mythic-ranked orc general. They had lost any hope of victory now. Guild leader, let's retreat. If the orc reinforcements reach us, I'm afraid that we won't be able to escape, Aqua Rose urgently suggested. No. Their timing is perfect. Magic array team on my mark. Feng stated as he shook his head. He had expected these reinforcements. Rather, it'd be strange if the orcs didn't send reinforcements after realizing that the base camp was under attack. Only he hadn't expected the reinforcements to arrive so quickly. Everyone gather around the orc warlord. Although Zero Wings members didn't know what Feng planned, they followed his command. As the orc reinforcements approached, the team grew nervous. They couldn't understand what Feng intended. Their guild leader couldn't possibly have another Tier 4 large-scale destruction magic scroll, right? When the orc general was less than 50 yards away and raised its greatsword for an attack. Activate the magic array. Feng shouted. Immediately, 9 magical class players at the edge of the base camp unfurled the magic array scrolls in their hands. These magic array scrolls, which he had produced before returning to bewildering forest town, would activate the 9-star polar domain. However, unlike the 9-star polar domain magic arrays he normally created, he had crafted this one with one of the 4 elemental sources he had obtained from the 2 elemental treasure boxes from Sunset Forest. Of the 4 elemental sources, he had used the only one that included one of the 3 supreme attributes. The source of illusion. In God's domain, the 3 supreme attributes were superior to every other attribute available. Elemental weapons that had been crafted with an elemental source containing one of these attributes would offer incredibly powerful skills. On the market, such elemental weapons generally sold for twice the amount of a normal elemental weapon. Hence, this 9-star polar domain was stronger than the last one, which he had crafted with the source of true frost. It would have been rather wasteful to use this 9-star polar domain on a single orc warlord. Now that the orc general had joined the fray, he could use this enhanced array to take out the orc general as well. As the 9 magical class players activated the 9-star polar domain, space within the base camp twisted and turned. Multiple stacked magic arrays appeared above them. As these magic arrays appeared, a tremendous amount of mana began to gather in the base camp. The mana was so dense that it began to condense into liquid droplets. As if space and time had frozen, no one in the camp could move. Even the peerless mythic orcs were petrified. When the magic arrays completed, an illusory barrier spread out from the camp's center and encased the area. Amazing. Truly amazing. So, this is what happens when you strengthen a magic array with one of the 3 supreme elements? Chapter 1534, Fall of Mythics. As the 9-star polar domain enveloped the orc base camp, it split the approaching reinforcements into 2 groups. In the end, only the orc general and a few orc warriors had entered the camp, whereas the majority of the reinforcing army was stuck outside of the illusory barrier. No matter how much the orc army outside attacked the barrier, their attacks dissipated into nothingness upon encountering it. Despite thousands of orcs attacking the barrier simultaneously, it didn't even tremble. This was the source of illusion's true power. Tier 3 attacks and below were utterly useless against the enhanced 9-star polar domain. They wouldn't even deplete the magic array's energy reserves in the slightest. Only Tier 4 attacks could deal any damage, and even then their damage would be limited and well within the array's tolerance range. As for the orcs inside the base camp, their movements had slowed quite a bit as if they had just stepped into a muddy swamp. When the orc warlord tried to attack Kola, in particular, everyone could now see its movements clearly. Kola, who looked miserable, raised his shield to defend himself. After receiving the attack, Kola only needed to retreat by 6 steps before stabilizing his body. Despite not having any of his life-saving skills active, he only lost a little over 16,000 HP. Impossible. What kind of magic array is this? What a strong magic array. Kola's teammates were stupefied when they saw him block one of the orc warlord's attacks without a life-saving skill. The orc warlord had long since recovered from its injured state, and Kola had only survived without a life-saving skill thanks to the red demon sharing a portion of the mythic boss's damage. Once the 9-star polar domain had suppressed the orcs, however, Kola took less damage than when he had activated Protection Blessing even when he took the full brunt of the boss's attacks. This was the first time they had even heard of a magic array suppressing a mythic monster to such a degree. Turtledove and Yi Wumian keep the orc general busy. The other MTs help them deal with the orc captains. Feng commanded as he watched the rapidly approaching orc general. Everyone else prioritized the orc captains before dealing with the orc general and warlord. With the source of illusion strengthening, the 9-star polar domain was even more powerful than a master magic array. Currently, the 9-star polar domain suppressed both mythic orcs' basic attributes by 50%. That was 10% more than the 9-star polar domain fortified with the source of true frost. Not even ordinary master magic arrays were capable of such a feat with world projection working alongside the array. The 2 mythic orcs only had 40% of their original attributes. At this standard, they were just slightly stronger than a Grand Lord of the same level. Tier 2 MTs like Turtledove and Yi Wumian shouldn't have any issues tanking one of the 2 bosses. As for the Grand Lord ranked orc captains, their combat power fell below that of a Great Lord of the same level when subjected to the twofold suppression. They were just slightly stronger than High Lords of the same level. Tier 1 MTs were more than capable of tanking them. Guild Leader, where did you get this magic array? It's marvelously effective. Aqua Rose could not help but exclaim when she saw Turtledove and Yi Wumian block the orc general's attacks without much trouble. Normally, the various large guilds took the long way around when they found a mythic monster. Unless they used siege weapons and sacrificed a large number of players, they had no hope of defeating a mythic monster at this stage of the game. Yet, their 1,000-man team was holding its ground against 2 mythic orcs simultaneously. Do you remember the 2 elemental treasure boxes we got from Sunset Forest? Those treasure boxes contained elemental sources. Not only can these elemental sources be used to refine weapons and equipment, but they can also serve as a power source for magic arrays, enhancing the final product. I used one of those elemental sources to strengthen the 9-star polar domain magic array, Feng explained truthfully. But keep this matter to yourself. We don't want this secret getting out. The elemental source's uses were still a secret to God's Domain's players. They were also extremely rare. By telling Aqua Rose, he could have her take note of them and avoid mistakenly discarding any she came across, assuming they were useless. So that's the case. After this battle, I'll collect as many elemental sources as possible. This way we can challenge several of the unshakable mythic bosses we've found thus far. Aqua Rose's eyes sparkled with excitement. Mythic bosses had appeared in several of Starmoon Kingdom's high-resource maps, and none of the guilds had dared to challenge them thus far. As fate would have it, these mythic bosses happened to be guarding ancient ruins entrances. Now that they had elemental sources, they had a way to enter the ruins. Hearing Aqua Rose's response, nervous sweat beaded on Feng's forehead. Elemental sources were no less rare than epic items. Not even mythic monsters dropped them. He had only obtained 2 elemental treasure boxes due to securing the first clear of a Grade 1 historical site. Even if they obtained the first clear for a lower-ranked historical site, they were unlikely to obtain another. Moreover, they needed more than just an elemental source to face mythic bosses. The Ring of Gospel's world projection was also necessary. However, each cost 5,000 magic crystals. This method of raiding mythic field bosses was far too extravagant. Time passed quickly. With the support of the 9-star polar domain, Zero Wings members only needed a moment to clear out everything except for the orc general and warlord. After dealing with the low-ranked orcs, the players' experience bars rose significantly. In contrast, however, their loot was pitiful. Only the Grand Lords and above had dropped a few items, but no one paid much attention to them. After all, they were far more interested to see what the two mythic orcs would drop. But at the end of the day, the two orc bosses were still mythic-ranked monsters. Even with so much suppression, they were still a burden on the team. When the orc general's HP fell to 70%, it abruptly raised its greatsword. Countless motes of fire began to gather around the weapon. Crap. Everyone, don't stand in front of the orc general, Feng shouted. Unfortunately, his warning came too late. Before his teammates had the chance to move out of the way, the orc general swung its greatsword forward. Scorching fire then rained down from above. Tier 4 skill, Infernal Prison. Any player the flames struck instantly turned into a smoldering pile of ash. Not even the Tier 1 MTs who had activated their life-saving skills had survived the attack. In a single move, the orc general had killed over 100 players. Immediately after the orc general's attack, the orc warlord, who only had 50% of its HP remaining, followed up by thrusting its saber into the ground. In response, blades of light randomly shot up from the dirt 50 yards around the boss. Due to the random attack pattern, many players failed to defend themselves in time. Anyone the blades of light hit died instantly. In the blink of an eye, another 200+ players had fallen. Everyone be careful of the boss's attacks. Do not try to take them head-on, Feng warned his companions. Despite the attribute suppression, a mythic monster's skills were incredibly lethal to players. Fortunately, the two mythic orcs were physical melee types, not magical classes. Otherwise, they could easily annihilate the Zero-Wing team with 1 or 2 Tier 4 spells regardless of the suppression. Due to Feng's warning, everyone kept a closer eye on the mythic orcs' movements. If the boss's movements changed in the slightest, they'd immediately distance themselves from the monsters. Even so, the mythic orcs' massive AoEs continued to claim lives. 45%, 40%, 30%. 686 players. 632 players. 574 players. When both bosses' HP fell to 20%, they entered a berserk state. Seeing this, Feng and the others activated their berserk skills. As the mythic orcs' HPs fell, their attacks became more frenzied. Despite activating their berserk skills, the team still suffered casualties. Even the red demon rapidly lost HP. Come on. Only have 5% more. Feng's heart grew cold when he saw how many players remained standing. The orc warlord still had 5% of its HP, while the orc general had 8%. However, they only had 300 members of the team remaining. Their DPS was growing weaker. As for his personal guards, Feng wanted to avoid summoning them unless absolutely necessary. As the two mythic bosses continued to throw out all kinds of AoE skills, not even his personal guard's survival was guaranteed. If they died, Feng would have to go to great lengths to resurrect them. When the orc warlord's HP fell to 3% and the orc general's fell to 5%, the 200 remaining players desperately activated one Tier 1 and Tier 2 magic scroll after another. However, at the rate they dealt damage, there was no doubt that these orc bosses would have the last laugh. It seems that I have no other choice. Realizing the hopelessness of the situation, Feng gritted his teeth and reluctantly pulled a magic scroll from his bag. This was the last of the 2 Tier 4 magic scrolls the Rock King had dropped. While Earthen Breath was a large-scale destruction spell, the Shadows of Purgatory he currently held was a Tier 4 domain skill. Although it only had a short, 30-second duration, it would be miraculously effective in a large-scale battle. But Feng couldn't care less as he unfurled the scroll and activated it. At the same time, he sacrificed 200 units of life force and activated Divine Providence. When Shadows of Purgatory activated, darkness fell over the orc base camp. Over a dozen shadowy tendrils rose from the ground, striking at the two mythic orcs. The mythic orcs had long since entered a full berserk state, their skin having turned crimson. Their defenses had also reached a frightening level. Even a casual attack from one of these orcs could send Kola, who had activated his berserk skill, flying over a dozen yards away. Yet, when these mythic bosses attacked the shadowy tendrils, it seemed as if their weapons struck an indestructible wall. Not only could the shadowy tendrils repel the orcs' attacks, but they could also pierce the boss's armor, thrusting into their bodies as the tendrils dealt hundreds of thousands of damage. Although the mythic orcs had focused on defending themselves after Feng activated Shadows of Purgatory, of the dozen or so shadowy tendrils Feng controlled, he always landed 1 or 2 direct hits during each attack cycle. As the two orcs defended themselves, the residual energy in their attacks surged towards the surrounding players. It took everything Zero Wings members had to defend against these residual attacks. They had nothing left to launch attacks of their own. If they dropped their guard in the slightest, they'd die instantly. 3%, 2%, 1%. Die. Feng abandoned all defense as he activated Void Shield and launched an all-out assault against the Mythic Orcs. He also changed the shadowy tendrils' attack patterns constantly. Every time Feng attacked one of the two Mythic Orcs, over half of the shadowy tendrils darted past the Orcs' defenses and landed a hit. When the team's member count fell below 100, Feng finally claimed the last strand of the Mythic Orcs' HPs. Chapter 1535, Kingdom Alarmed. Success. We won. The surviving team members cheered joyously as the Orc Warlord and Orc General froze and collapsed. It had an intense battle. Although the Mythic Orcs hadn't had much HP remaining, they would have likely fallen to the boss's attacks if Feng hadn't used another Tier 4 magic scroll near the end of the battle. The melee players hadn't even been able to approach the Orcs to attack near the end of the battle, and the Orcs' rapid attacks blocked most if not all of the ranged players' attacks. They're finally dead. Feng breathed a sigh of relief. Although he had activated Void Shield to cover his lack of defense in the end, the Mythic Orcs' attacks were too powerful. They had only needed a few short seconds to deplete the Void Shield's energy by more than half. Had he not activated Void Shield, the two Mythic Orcs would have diced him into mincemeat before he had a chance to strike. Meanwhile, the surviving players' experience bars rose rapidly after the Orc Warlord and Orc General fell. Even Feng, who was a level 60 player, watched his experience bar increase. 36%, 50%, 80%. In the blink of an eye, he rose from level 60 to level 61. Eventually, his experience bar settled at 7% of level 61. The rest of the survivors watched their experience bars increase by a larger margin. On average, every survivor leveled up at least twice. The players below level 50 leveled up 3 times. The insane amount of EXP the two mythic bosses' deaths had awarded stupefied Zero Wings players. The two orcs had also dropped a large pile of loot. At a glance, they had easily dropped over 100 items. Although it was not a jackpot, it was a bountiful harvest for killing 2 level 50+ mythic monsters. As everyone shifted their attention towards the loot, the sound of a system notification reached their ears. Starmoon Kingdom Region System Announcement. Congratulations to Zero Wing for killing the Orc Warlord and stopping the Orc Army's invasion on Bewildering Forest Town. Rewarding 30,000 guild popularity, 100 guild influence in Starmoon Kingdom, and 50,000 guild honor points. The system announcement repeated 3 times, echoing in every player's ears in Starmoon Kingdom. What? Didn't they say that the Orc Army in Bewildering Forest Town was unstoppable? How did Zero Wing defeat it? This is impossible. I just came back from Bewildering Forest Town. There were millions of orcs assaulting the town. The army even had siege weapons and mythic bosses. Zero Wing must have cheated somehow. A commotion erupted over the system announcement. No one could believe it was true. They had all witnessed the hellish scene in Bewildering Forest Town. Even if they gathered every elite player in Starmoon Kingdom, they might fail to defend the town, let alone Zero Wing's small team. The Orc Army wasn't a force current players had hope of stopping, yet Zero Wing had succeeded. The system announcement had to be a joke. What's going on? What has Zero Wing been doing? Galaxy Past, who rested in Starmoon City, was dazed when he saw the announcement. Nobody had a clearer understanding of the situation in Bewildering Forest Town than him. By the time he had left, Bewildering Forest Town had held on by a thread. The walls and magic array protecting the town had been about to collapse. Yet shortly after the Star Alliance had withdrawn, Zero Wing had defeated the Orc Army. That was an army of several million orcs they were talking about. Even slaughtering several million defenseless pigs would take more time than it took for Zero Wing to defeat the army. Furthermore, the Orc Army had been led by 3 mythic-ranked Orc generals. Even if these 3 mythic orcs stood still and did nothing, Zero Wing's 1,000-man team would need a very long time to kill them. I've already sent some people to investigate the matter, guild leader, but based on our reports, it doesn't seem that anyone saw what happened in Bewildering Forest Town. We only know that Zero Wing's team remained in the town. Meanwhile, we still can't reach any of our spies. By the looks of it, they must have died. We'll need to wait for them to resurrect before we can learn more about the situation. Flourishing Willow reported, a confused look on her face. She could not figure out what Zero Wing's 1,000 players had done. Not only had they held off an assault of several million orcs, but they had also slain the orc warlord commanding the army. They felt as if the system were playing a trick on them. Meanwhile, inside Heaven's Burial's residence, Singular Burial, who had been preparing to set out for the Orc Empire, fell silent when he heard the system announcement. Could the town have hidden a secret weapon? A complex expression surfaced on Singular Burial's face as he read the system announcement. We should have waited longer if that were the case. Regret and envy overwhelmed Singular Burial. Just the 50,000 guild honor points could make him drool, not to mention the guild influence. Despite mingling in the Orc Empire for so long, Heaven's Burial had only accumulated a little over 30,000 guild popularity, 10,000 of which had been obtained after capturing an orc town. As for guild honor points, which were required to hire NPC mercenaries, the guild had only earned a little over 20,000. Guild honor points weren't like the contribution points players could earn by killing orcs and completing quests related to the Orc Empire. Generally, a guild could only earn these points when members completed quests the kingdom commissioned. Moreover, each quest usually only rewarded 1 to 3 points. To make matters worse, there was a limited number of such quests each day, and they needed to factor in the competition from other large guilds. If not for Heaven's Burial's success with capturing an orc town, it wouldn't have accumulated over 20,000 guild honor points. Yet, by defending Bewildering Forest Town, Zero Wing had earned 50,000 GHPs. With so many GHPs, he could take down Ancient Rock City even without Beast Emperor's help. Now, however, Zero Wing had stolen the opportunity. Zero Wing sure is lucky. They've even encountered such an opportunity, Lei Jingyang said, sneering. But one cannot become an overlord in God's domain by relying on luck. Guild Leader Singular, let's hurry and take action. Once we capture Ancient Rock City, Heaven's Burial will dominate the several neighboring kingdoms. Although Lei Jingyang envied Zero Wing's fortune, he was confident that Zero Wing couldn't make up for the difference between their side strengths with luck. All right. We'll stop waiting for Beast Emperor's reply and capture Ancient Rock City. Singular Burial nodded as he also felt a sense of urgency after the sudden development. If Zero Wing wanted to, it could hire 15,000 NPC mercenaries with its 50,000 GHPs to help raid an orc city. Although Zero Wing didn't have evil beasts or demons, it had far more powerful siege weapons than Heaven's Burial. Zero Wing definitely had a chance of capturing an orc city. Before Zero Wing set its sights on the Orc Empire, they needed to secure Ancient Rock City. Even if Zero Wing targeted an orc city, it'd have a difficult time capturing it. Among the numerous cities in the Orc Empire, Ancient Rock City was the easiest to raid. The other cities couldn't be taken down with just 10 or 20,000 NPC mercenaries and a few siege weapons. While Starmoon Kingdom's large guilds discussed the matter, Feng stood in the middle of the orc base camp outside of Bewildering Forest Town, shifting through the mythic boss's loot. Meanwhile, the surviving healers resurrected the players that had died during the battle. Due to the orc warlord's death, chaos descended upon the orc army, and the orcs fled in all directions. The orc reinforcements were nowhere to be seen. As a result, Zero Wing's members had a chance to catch their breath and rest. While the dead resurrected, Feng, who organized the pile of loot, picked up a tattered, pitch-black piece of armor. The instant his hand touched the piece of armor, a stinging pain shot through his fingers. Even with his incredibly high magic resistance, his HP had fallen by 10,000 instantly. What is this thing? Feng pulled his hand away from the broken armor and looked at it curiously. An ominous, crimson aura began to devour his hand. Although his HP had stopped falling once he stopped touching the armor, he had gained a debuff that weakened him for 1 minute. This was inconceivable. He had touched the armor for a mere moment, yet he was in such a state. Had he held the armor for too long, he might have lost his life. Chapter 1536, Legendary Set Equipment. The players standing close to Feng noticed the sudden drop to their commander's HP. Guild leader, is something wrong? Violet Cloud asked curiously as she watched his HP bar. The battle was already over and there were no enemies around them, yet Feng had suddenly lost a large chunk of his HP. It would be difficult not to notice something so strange. It's nothing. I just took some damage from an item, Feng said as he waved off her concern with a hand. Ordinary players might be in danger if they suddenly lost 10,000 HP, but it wasn't a problem for him. The issue was the disintegrated debuff. Not only did the debuff place him in a weakened state, reducing his basic attributes by 50%, but it also made him feel somewhat weary. It felt as if the debuff sapped away his concentration. Damage from an item? Violet Cloud and the others' curiosity grew. This was the first time they had heard of a dropped item hurting a player. They turned their attention towards the piece of broken armor on the ground. Even after examining it for some time, they didn't see anything unusual. The piece of broken armor didn't radiate any frightening mana or pressure. Feng chuckled at their response. God's domain had many strange, mysterious items. Not every item could be judged by the mana or pressure it radiated. In fact, some items appeared harmless, yet were actually fatal to players. Feng had no doubt that this piece of pitch-black armor was one such item. Despite storing a frightening amount of power, it showed none of it on the surface. Leaving the item where it was, Feng lightly tapped a finger on the armor to open its attribute panel. Even with the slightest touch, Feng lost another 10,000 HP. This time, however, as he had only touched the piece of armor for a fraction of a second, only a small bit of crimson aura wrapped around his finger. Fortunately, the disintegrated debuff only lasted 10 seconds. Impossible. What kind of item is that? Everyone gaped when Feng lost another 10,000 HP after poking the black armor. They couldn't bring themselves to believe that God's domain had such a deadly item. Unknown. Feng frowned. Normally, players could, more or less, inspect an item's introductory text even if they hadn't picked it up yet. However, all he got from the armor's attribute panel was the word, unknown. This meant that players would have to pick up the item and appraise it to check its attribute panel. Unfortunately, picking up the piece of black armor and storing it in his bag was too dangerous. He had already lost so much HP after his brief contact with the item. If he held onto the piece of armor for too long, he'd likely die before he could store it in his bag. What a troublesome item. Feng sighed. Immediately he activated the aura of Earth's absolute domain, making himself immune to all damage for 10 seconds. Following which, he snatched the piece of armor and stuffed it into his spatial bag, completing the process with lightning speed. Although absolute domain prevented him from taking damage, it did nothing to stop the crimson aura from contaminating his body. By the time Feng stored the piece of pitch-black armor, the crimson aura had tainted his entire body. System, you have obtained the disintegration armor. The madness aura is contaminating your body, reducing your basic attributes by 50% and weakening your mind. The disintegration armor can only be stored in your bag space, will drop upon death and cannot be traded. This is the rumored disintegration armor? Feng stared at the pitch-black armor inside his bag in shock. For a moment, he completely forgot about the weariness the armor had caused him. The disintegration armor was one piece of the disintegration set, a famous legendary set equipment in God's domain. Like the disintegration axe, the set had been created by the Orc Empire's founding emperor. Due to the disintegration axe and disintegration set, the Orc Empire had wielded unparalleled power. They were why the Orcs had reigned chaos over God's domain's continent. However, both the disintegration axe and the set had been destroyed with the founding emperor's death. Moreover, unlike the disintegration axe, whose fragment had been left in the Orc Palace's treasury, the disintegration set had gone missing after its destruction. There were no clues about the set equipment's whereabouts. Feng had never expected to obtain a piece of the disintegration set here. A legendary set equipment. Even after 10 years in God's domain, Feng had never heard of an expert wearing a legendary set equipment. Even one legendary item was incredibly powerful. It would be inconceivable for a player to collect a full legendary set equipment. A Tier 5 player with such a set could likely slay a god. According to legend, the Orc Empire's founding emperor had once killed an ancient god despite not being a Tier 6 god. He had been able to do so thanks to the disintegration axe and set. Because of this, the disintegration set had been known as one of God's domain's 9 great legendary sets. Feng had never thought that he'd be fortunate enough to find one of the set pieces today. It was even the most important chest piece. Following which, Feng activated the omniscient eyes to inspect the disintegration armor. The instant he clicked to inspect the armor, the system revealed a 30-second loading bar. The disintegration armor's appraisal time was much longer than a normal epic item. This outcome reassured Feng that the disintegration armor in his bag was a piece of the rumored disintegration set. Time passed quickly. While Feng appraised the disintegration armor, His team members watch him with surprise and curiosity. They all wanted to know what kind of item the orc warlord had dropped. The instant Feng had stored the pitch-black chest piece, his attributes had fallen tremendously. If an ordinary expert had suffered such a massive decrease, they'd be crippled. Once the appraisal completed, the Disintegration Armor's attribute panel appeared before Feng. Destroyed Disintegration Armor. One piece of the legendary set equipment the Orc Empire's founding emperor had crafted. The wearer of this armor will gain even greater strength than that of Titans. They will also fall into an endless cycle of madness. However, the disintegration armor had been damaged beyond repair during the Great War, and now leaks the disintegration power within. The disintegration power will taint any player that carries this item. What? It's broken beyond repair? Feng was speechless. He had thought he had gotten lucky and obtained a piece of fragmented legendary equipment. If that were the case, he could gradually restore the item to legendary rank. He hadn't expected the item to be beyond repair. Not only couldn't he use the disintegration armor, but he couldn't repair it either. It was no more than a broken piece of scrap metal. But before Feng closed the attribute panel, a series of system notifications bombarded his ears. System, congratulations. You have obtained the legendary quest Recast the Disintegration Armor. Quest content. Due to the spreading disintegration power, orcs have begun to mutate. To prevent the spreading disintegration power, you need to recast the disintegration armor. Rewards unknown. System. Due to the disintegration armor's disintegration power spreading, you will attract all mutated orcs' attention. System. You have become targeted for mutated orcs. Please take care during exploration. System announcement. A player has triggered the new expansion pack, Orcs Rebellion. System update required. The estimated duration is 5 hours. Please prepare to log out. What's going on? Guild leader, did you do this? In response to the notifications, Zero Wings members turned towards Feng, assuming he had caused the release of this new expansion pack. Chapter 1537, Bountiful Loot. Chapter 1537, Bountiful Loot. Looking at the system notifications, Feng fell into deep thought. Although he knew that it wouldn't be so easy to obtain the disintegration set, which had once been used by one of God's domain's legendary figures, he hadn't expected it to be this difficult. Repairing the armor was one thing, but it was a different story if he had to recast it. That was no different than asking him to forge a new disintegration armor, a legendary set equipment. Moreover, as long as he carried the disintegration armor on him, mutated orcs would randomly attack out in the fields. This would doubtlessly slow his progress. Most importantly, he was stuck in a perpetual disintegrated state, his basic attributes severely weakened. It also drained his concentration. If he did not find a solution quickly, it would severely impact his leveling and questing efficiency. It seems that I'll have to pay Celiora a visit. Feng sighed helplessly. Celiora was the only Grandmaster Forger he was familiar with. As for Master Forgers, they weren't capable of recasting an item of the disintegration armor's caliber. After all, the disintegration set was top tier even among legendary set equipment. As Feng got his team members to settle down, preparing to log off and rest, he noticed an additional skill in his skill window. I actually received a unique skill as a reward? Feng could not help his surprise as he opened his skill window. Without realizing it, he had gained a unique skill called Disintegration Field, a domain skill that could only be used when affected by the disintegrated debuff. Disintegration Field. Disintegrates all skills and spells within a 50-yard radius. Skills and spells at Tier 2 and below will be nullified, while skills and spells above Tier 2 will be weakened by 50%. All entities within range of the disintegration field will sustain a 30% reduction to basic attributes, physique, and stamina in addition to a 300% increase to their stamina and concentration consumption rates. No cooldown. So, there is still a benefit to all of this. Feng was astonished as he read the disintegration field's description. Generally, only Tier 4 domain skills and above lacked limitations such as cooldown and duration. In terms of suppression, disintegration field was even more effective than world projection. All players in range would have to endure a drastic increase to their stamina and concentration. Moreover, unlike world projection, he didn't have to play 5,000 magic crystals to activate this new skill. The only real downside to disintegration field was that unlike world projection, it did not differentiate between friend and foe. Everyone within range would be affected. Even so, it was quite impressive. At the very least, he wouldn't have to fear group battles when he activated Disintegration Field. Unlike basic attributes, it was not easy to increase hidden attributes like stamina and concentration. These attributes generally only underwent qualitative transformations when players upgraded their tiers. Without stamina and concentration, players wouldn't be able to fight even if they had full HP. They would be sheep for the slaughter. Following which, Feng collected the remaining loot the Orc Warlord and Ord General had dropped. Among the 100+ items dropped, most of the items were subpar. Aside from the disintegration armor, the best item dropped was merely an epic ranked cloth armor hat named Eye of Disaster. It was a top-tier item for magical class players. When equipped, not only did the Eye of Disaster increase the wearer's spellcasting range by 20%, but it also increased spell completion rates by 2%. Feng didn't assign the Eye of Disaster to anyone specific on the team. Instead, he added it to the guild's core warehouse, setting it up for internal auction starting with a 50,000 GCP starting bid. Currently, 1 GCP in Zero Wing was worth 32 copper coins. Hence, the Eye of Disaster's starting bid was only 1,600 gold, which was quite cheap. There were also around 24 pieces of level 50 and 55 fine gold and dark gold equipment. Among them 8 were dark gold rank. All of these items were top-tier weapons and pieces of equipment, which even the various large guilds would fight over. Normally, level 50+ dark gold items only dropped from level-appropriate large-scale team dungeon, and they had an extremely low drop rate. Aside from equipment, there were over a dozen epic ranked materials of various kinds. 17 magic scrolls had also dropped. Although none were tier 4, there were 2 tier 3 summoning scrolls and 3 tier 3 large-scale destruction magic scrolls. But compared to these items, Feng most valued the mana-enhancing potion recipe and advanced alchemy recipe. Different from the mana potions and mana recovery potions found on the market, the mana-enhancing potion neither increased players' maximum mana nor helped players recover their mana. Instead, it improved spells' effects by 100% for 20 seconds. It was a Berserk-type potion that had a 10-minute cooldown. Berserk-type potions were impossible to find on the market. Guilds that produced them generally kept them for their own use. After all, not all players had the opportunity to learn a Berserk skill. With the mana-enhancing potion, a guild's elite teams would have a much easier time raiding dungeons. The potion was particularly useful to healers. For 20 seconds, healers could double their healing capacity, greatly improving a team's survivability. If the mana-enhancing potion could be mass-produced, it would definitely provide a significant boost to Zero Wing's elite members for a short time. After Feng finished organizing the loot, he took a look at the time and noticed that he had less than a minute before the system update began. He called up the system interface and chose to log out of God's domain. Elsewhere, players in the several kingdoms and 2 empires next to the Orc Empire were in an uproar. Everyone had their own guesses about what would happen once the new expansion pack took effect. Meanwhile, the various large guilds hurriedly prepared to welcome the new expansion pack. Every expansion pack was an opportunity. If taken advantage of properly, a guild could enjoy a burst of development. Inside a high-class restaurant in White River City. Send someone to investigate the power that triggered the new expansion pack immediately. The 100 Flowers Palace must not miss out on this opportunity. Cleansed Rue, the 100 Flowers Palace's guild leader, issued the command as soon as she saw the system announcement. The Orc Empire had become the focal point for many large guilds. Previously, Heaven's Burial had gotten the jump on the rest of the guilds by capturing the easiest orc town in the Orc Empire, and the benefits it had reaped thus far had left the rest of them drooling. Now that someone had triggered a new expansion pack relating to the Orc Empire, this was the perfect opportunity for first-rate guilds like the 100 Flowers Palace to break the current status quo. The 100 Flowers Palace wasn't the only guild to react in such a way. The Star Alliance, Heaven's Burial, and other large guilds had launched their own investigation. Even the super first-rate guild, Crimson Emperor, which temporarily operated in Starmoon Kingdom, had ordered an investigation to learn which power was responsible for the announcement. The players that triggered expansion packs usually had a certain advantage over other players. If they could partner with these players, they could share this advantage when the new expansion pack took effect. Elder Yuan, have you learned anything? Galaxy Past asked as he watched Yuan Tiexin on the screen. When it came to information, nobody had more than the secret pavilion. The secret pavilion had its eyes and ears in almost every corner of God's domain. When an expansion pack warranted an offline system update, It always dispatched its people to learn as much as it could. I do have a little information. You should be able to guess which guild is responsible for this expansion pack, Yuan Tiexin said as he caressed his beard. Could it really be Zero Wing? Galaxy Past asked, astonished. Not only had Zero Wing defended bewildering Forest Town and acquired a large number of guild honor points, but it had also triggered the new expansion pack. Zero Wing simply wasn't giving the other guilds any chances. In response, Yuan Tiexin nodded before disconnecting the call. Uncle Yuan, there's no stopping Zero Wing's rise now. First, they helped Phoenix Rain secure third place in Thunder Island's contest. Then they built a city in Starmoon Kingdom. Now they've even triggered a new expansion pack relating to the Orc Empire. As time passes, Nine Dragons Emperor will have an even more difficult time dealing with Zero Wing, Purple Jade said, smiling as she looked through the information the secret pavilion had gathered on Zero Wing. You're right. The guild leader has already contacted me, instructing us to negotiate with Zero Wing for a partnership. Didn't you intend to challenge Martial Dragon eventually? You can use this opportunity to spar with Zero Wing's experts and get some practice, Yuan Tiexin said, sighing ruefully. Before he knew it, Zero Wing had grown from an upstart guild into an existence that even the secret pavilion had to take seriously. Chapter 1538, Zero Wing in the Spotlight. Chapter 1538 Zero Wing in the Spotlight. As God's Domain system update began, players were forcefully logged out of the game. When the system update began, night had already arrived in God's Domain. This meant that it was currently daytime in the real world. Hence, the system update did not particularly affect the working-class players. On the contrary, they were excited. Meanwhile, inside one of the White Tiger Dojo's secret training rooms, the lid of a virtual gaming cabin abruptly opened. A man with a stalwart body then climbed out of the cabin. As he left his cabin, he was greeted by the sight of a white-clad, middle-aged man on a sofa before him. Despite the lack of movement, the middle-aged man projected a natural dignity and power. This middle-aged man was none other than Jiang Tianyuan, one of the White Tiger Dojo's branch hall masters. Hall master, why are you here? The stalwart man asked curiously when he saw Jiang Tianyuan. For some unknown reason, the main branch is placing more focus on God's Domain, hoping that the various branch dojos will produce results. Tianji, you've played God's Domain for a considerable amount of time now. Tell me about your situation in the game, Jiang Tianyuan calmly demanded as he sipped his tea. Currently, I'm developing smoothly in the Purple Thorns Kingdom. I've already established a guild and annexed several others. We've also taken ownership of over 10 shops in NPC cities that have player populations exceeding 500,000, Tianji replied. Only my guild's foundation is shaky. With our current number of experts, we have no way to contend with the various large guilds. I will need more time before we can do so. Haven't you hired first-rate guild experts to train our apprentices? Are those experts not enough? Jiang Tianyuan couldn't help his frown as he listened to this report. Although we have the help of a first-rate guild, the first batch of apprentices only began their training a short time ago. Very few have reached the trial tower's 5th floor thus far. Moreover, with the difference in levels, none of the apprentices can contribute to the guild's overall combat power yet, Feng Tianji said, smiling bitterly. He had sorely underestimated God's Domain. God's Domain was clearly different from past virtual reality games. Not only was the game extremely realistic, but the complexity of its techniques and combination moves were beyond his expectations. They weren't easy to grasp within a short time. Otherwise, the large guilds with hundreds of thousands of members wouldn't have so few experts. Although the White Tiger Dojo's apprentices had solid foundations, that was all. These foundations merely provided a better starting point than ordinary players and gave the apprentices a higher chance of becoming experts. Only the truly talented apprentices could improve quickly and reach the trial tower's 5th floor. However, since they had joined the game so late, they were far behind the mainstream players in levels. Even though the main god system had made some adjustments, allowing new players to level slightly faster, and they had the help of high-level players, it would be a considerable amount of time before they caught up. How about this? Visit the Big Dipper Dojo personally and attempt to persuade them again. We can renegotiate on the conditions, Jiang Tianyuan said after giving the matter some thought. Initially, Jiang Tianyuan had asked for Zero Wing's help as a passing thought. He hadn't really viewed the matter as important. However, he hadn't expected Zero Wing to be so capable in God's Domain. Understood. I'll see to it right away. Feng Tianji nodded. When Feng Tianji had joined God's domain, he hadn't known much about the game's internal situation. He had only realized how impressive Zero Wing truly was after fighting in the game for some time. At the very least, the current first-rate guilds had no chance against Zero Wing. The guild even had the sacred training ground for experts, Stone Forest Town. The first-rate guild they had allied with frequently brought them to Stone Forest Town, and Feng Tianji had to admit that the battle arena was amazing. If ordinary players trained there, they would develop far faster than training in the Divine Colosseum's Trial Tower. Following which, Feng Tianji made his way to the Big Dipper Dojo. Meanwhile, in the Greenwater Villa, Feng used his free time to guide the guild's internal members as they worked on their combat techniques. Due to Zero Wing's growing fame, more people fought to become internal members. Despite the guild's strict requirements, they were now nurturing over 300 internal members. Even the massive Greenwater Villa felt a little cramped due to so many people living and training in it. Guild leader, the weakest of our new recruits can now reach the Trial Tower's 4th floor, and quite a few have already reached the 5th floor. Among the various internal members, Yu Zipping is improving the fastest. It's no wonder why you had such a high opinion of him. He has already reached the 5th floor's late stage. I doubt that it'll be long before he reaches the 6th floor, Blackie reported as he watched Yu Zipping and the others, who were currently training in the main hall. It's a pity that we can only recruit a small number of internal members right now. If we can recruit a few more, we could build an army of experts very quickly. Zero Wing shone like the midday sun in Starmoon Kingdom. If they could sustain 1,000 internal members, they could quickly train a 1,000-man expert team. Even without relying on the guild's main force, they could easily raid team dungeons. They could also establish another branch guild. First-rate guilds maintained their status for so long due to the high number and sufficient strength of the experts they nurtured. After joining God's domain, these first-rate guilds could afford to develop in multiple countries at once, competing for resources in multiple locations. In contrast, Zero Wing wasn't strong enough to do so yet. I'm afraid we'll have to wait for matters on Gentle Snow's side to settle down first. However, unless those companies find another interested party, it shouldn't be long before the negotiations conclude. After all, it is costly to maintain a training ground of that size. Feng's head ached over this issue. He had never thought that he'd have to endure such a day. Rather than a guild limiting their training ground's development, their training ground limited Zero Wing's development. As Feng discussed the new training ground with Blackie, Liang Jing contacted him. Head instructor a man named Yuan Tiexin is looking for you. Should I have him wait in the reception room? Liang Jing asked. Yuan Tiexin? Feng was a little confused. I understand. Have him wait in reception room 1 for me. I'll head there now. All right. Liang Jing nodded. She then led Yuan Tiexin and his entourage to reception room 1. In the Big Dipper Dojo's lobby, the arrival of Yuan Tiexin's group had caused a small commotion. However, this commotion wasn't due to the crowd recognizing Yuan Tiexin, but because of his 2 bodyguards. Both bodyguards wore black suits with a silver shield logo embossed on the left breast. This was none other than the Guardian Group's logo, a world-class bodyguard company. Moreover, both were 3-star bodyguards. Normally, it should be impossible to find such high-rank bodyguards in Jianghu City, as not even the city's most powerful corporations qualified to hire them, yet these 2 had come here. Big Bro Tianji, don't tell me you're really here to speak with that Feng? The last time I came here, his behavior had been incredibly arrogant. He showed the White Tiger Dojo no respect. Is a partnership with him really necessary for a game? He truly could not understand why Jiang Tianyuan repeatedly sought cooperation from a gaming guild. The White Tiger Dojo was one of the country's top dojos. They could easily convince any gaming guild to cooperate with a word, yet Feng Tianji, one of the dojo's instructors, had paid a personal visit to negotiate with Zero Wing. It was inconceivable. Enough. The hall master and I have our reasons. Feng Tianji's displeasure grew as he listened to Xie Qiwen. By chance, he noticed Yuan Tiexin's group enter a reception room, and shock gripped his heart. Huh. That is the secret pavilion's Yuan Tiexin? Why is he here? After joining God's domain, he had investigated the game's major powers thoroughly. Naturally, he had memorized the faces of people like Yuan Tiexin, an upper echelon of a transcendental power like the secret pavilion. Since the man hadn't changed his appearance in the game, Feng Tianji easily recognized Yuan Tiexian with a glance. Chapter 1539, Super First-Rate Guild. Chapter 1539, Super First-Rate Guild. The Secret Pavilion? Overhearing Feng Tianji's mumbles and seeing the reverential look he gave Yuan Tiexian's group, Xie Qiwen couldn't help his growing curiosity. Feng Tianji was the youngest instructor in the White Tiger Dojo and Jiang Tianyuan's personal disciple. Feng Tianji had the potential of becoming a branch hall master. The man was an expert and had already participated in numerous international competitions. Moreover, both Jiang Tianyuan and the White Tiger Dojo's main hall master valued Feng Tianji, which gave his words considerable weight in the dojo. Yet now, someone like Feng Tianji was actually revered Yuan Tiexian's group. It's not surprising that you don't recognize them. Let's wait outside for now, Feng Tianji instructed, not bothering to give an explanation to Xie Qiwen. He was no longer a noob that knew nothing about God's domain. He now had a clear understanding of how deep God's domain's waters were. He also knew how much potential the game had. Aside from the time acceleration function which allowed players to enjoy longer lifespans, the game's ability to replace many of the sports, sources of entertainment, and work in the real world displayed its frightening potential value. Hence, the various industry giants around the world were investing in God's domain, one after another. They all hoped to secure some advantage in resources before the eventual birth of the new era. The Secret Pavilion was a transcendental existence in the virtual gaming world and had the backing of multiple international corporations. The White Tiger Dojo simply couldn't compare. We're waiting outside? For a moment, Xie Qiwen thought he had heard wrong. They had traveled so far to visit the Big Dipper Dojo, yet not only didn't this dojo provide the proper, grand reception, but Feng Tianji even suggested that they wait, allowing the new arrivals to conduct their business before their group. Xie Qiwen even wondered if the man before him was really the Feng Tianji he knew. However, since the man had decided, he had no choice but to wait in the lobby with Feng Tianji. Meanwhile, in Reception Room 1, Feng arrived a short moment after Yuan Tiexian made himself comfortable. "Uncle Yuan, I'm sorry for the wait," Feng said as he greeted Yuan Tiexian and his entourage. "May I know the reason for your sudden visit?" After not seeing each other for some time, Feng could clearly sense a significant change in both Yuan Tiexian and Purple Jade's auras. Yuan Tiexian in particular felt as if his youth had been restored. However, the change didn't particularly surprise Feng. Throughout the various adventures and battles in God's domain, one's brain would work continuously. This in turn kept the body cells active. In addition, a guild upper echelon like Yuan Tiexian had the privilege of a steady supply of S-rank nutrient fluid, keeping his body young and strong. This would become public knowledge in the future. Although it was impossible to achieve eternal life through this method, it was possible to extend one's life. After the mind-space system's introduction, in particular, God's domain's effect on a human lifespan would become more apparent. This was also the main reason that the various industry giants were investing in God's domain. "You haven't changed at all. Can't I visit purely to congratulate Zero Wing?" Yuan Tiexian could not help but laugh at Feng's straightforward attitude. "Congratulate Zero Wing?" Feng repeated skeptically. He did not believe Yuan Tiexian in the least. The Secret Pavilion was a massive guild. An upper echelon like Yuan Tiexian should have a long list of tasks every day. How could he possibly have enough time to come all the way here for a chat? "Alright, I'll just get straight to the point. Our guild leader has expressed great interest in Zero Wing and is willing to invest in your guild. We only want 50% of Zero Wing's shares. In return, we'll guarantee that Zero Wing will become a super first-rate guild very quickly," Yuan Tiexian said. 50%? Feng frowned. He hadn't expected the Secret Pavilion to have such a large appetite, but he had to admit that the offer was tempting. If the Secret Pavilion made such an offer to a first-rate guild, it would likely jump at the chance. Every first-rate guild in the virtual gaming world dreamed of becoming a super first-rate guild. Although only one rank separated the two, the difference was like that between heaven and earth. "I haven't finished. Aside from receiving capital from the Secret Pavilion, Zero Wing will receive 2% of the Secret Pavilion's shares. This way, Zero Wing will not have to concern itself about the right to speak with the Secret Pavilion. As for guild leader Black Flame, he will become one of the Secret Pavilion's elders," Yuan Tiexian said, chuckling as he saw through Feng's hesitation. "The guild leader is willing to offer 2% of the guild's shares?" Purple Jade was stunned. Although she had accompanied Yuan Tiexin to negotiate with several first-rate guilds, they had never offered such generous terms. With 2% of the secret pavilion shares, one would be a major shareholder. The secret pavilion was a colossal existence. It even had the financial support of multiple international corporations. Please allow me to refuse. Feng shook his head and rejected the offer without hesitation. Both Yuan Tiexin and Purple Jade were dumbfounded. Our guild leader has only offered Zero Wing a portion of the guild's shares thus far. Will you not consider the offer? Or report this to your guild leader? Yuan Tiexin pleaded sincerely. Although Zero Wing displayed great process in its development, the competition in God's domain was just beginning. As time passed, the various corporations that had invested in the game would begin to shine. Based on the secret pavilion's information, several unknown guilds and first-rate guilds have begun to show frightening progress. Meanwhile, these guilds had just as many and just as powerful experts as Zero Wing. Moreover, unlike Zero Wing, these guilds had the support of major corporations. Their development speed would only grow. There is no need. Our guild leader has already made his decision, Feng said as he shook his head. If Zero Wing had the support of the secret pavilion, it could become a giant in the virtual gaming world in a short time. However, Feng firmly believed that Zero Wing could do so without the secret pavilion's help. It would just take a little more time. I understand. Yuan Tiexin sighed. He felt that Zero Wing was a little overconfident. Becoming a giant in the virtual gaming world wasn't easy. He then said, since that is the case, we won't force the matter. I'll move on to the next matter then. The secret pavilion is interested in one of the Orc Empire's cities and would like Zero Wing's help. Once the task is complete, we will provide 10 black cards and 2 plots of high-potential land in the Apocalypse Empire's main cities. We'll also provide some information which could determine Zero Wing's survival. Information that relates to Zero Wing's survival? Feng could not help his growing curiosity. I'm not trying to scare you. Whether you believe it or not is entirely up to you. Are you interested in this exchange? Yuan Tiexin asked with a smile. If Zero Wing agrees, it may have enough time to prepare, avoiding too many losses. In reality, Yuan Tiexin had been shocked when he had received this news. He had never thought that things would have developed to such severity. Allow me to refuse. Feng said again, shaking his head. Although I don't have a particularly clear understanding of the Orc Empire situation, I know that capturing its cities is very difficult. Since you have asked for Zero Wing's help, you must be aiming for our guild honor points. 10 black cards and 2 plots of land are not enough. How much do you want then? Feng's greed astonished Purple Jade. Feng smiled in response, raising 2 fingers as he said, I want 20% of the Orc city's profits. This is Zero Wing's bottom line. Chapter 1540, Evil God's Temple Activated. Chapter 1540, Evil God's Temple Activated. 20%? A tight frown formed on Yuan Tiexin's face. Your asking price is too high. Do you know how difficult it is to raid an Orc city? That isn't something that can be done just by having some NPC mercenaries. The defense of any city in the Orc Empire could make a first-rate guild despair. Setting aside the defensive magic arrays protecting the cities, just the number of orcs garrisoning each city exceeded 1 million easily. The Orc cities also possessed various defensive structures. Although each city had only 3 mythic orcs protecting it, it had thousands of Grand Lord-ranked orcs. The amount of manpower and resources required to capture a city was simply impossible for a first-rate guild to fulfill. My asking price is not high. Moreover, I feel that Zero Wing is worth this price. If you insist on your price, I can only dispatch 10,000 NPC mercenaries to aid you. However, I will not send anyone from our guild, Feng explained. The price the secret pavilion offered would indeed be very tempting to a first-rate guild. After all, having 10 black cards would enable a guild to let their expert members gain more combat experience against other expert players, which would greatly help in improving said expert members' combat standards. As proof, Shadow Sword and the other core members of Zero Wing had reached the refinement realm just from training at the secret pavilion simulation training system for some time. Meanwhile, high-potential lands in the Apocalypse Empire's major cities were things that could not be bought even if one offered tens of thousands of gold. Not to mention, the secret pavilion was actually offering 2 such plots of land. As long as one opened a shop on these lands and managed them well, they could rake in a significant amount of income. Unfortunately, although both things were very tempting to the current Zero Wing, the effort it would have to expend did not match up with the gains it would be receiving. Although Feng did not have a clear understanding regarding the cities in the Orc Empire, he knew a lot regarding the cost of capturing the cities of foreign races. In God's domain, players faced a long and arduous battle of attrition if they wished to capture a city belonging to a foreign race. Many lives would have to be sacrificed, especially when it came to breaking the defensive magic array of the city. With the current standards of players, fully depleting the energy of a city's defensive magic array would take several days of constant bombardment. Only Tier 5 attacks and above would be capable of weakening a city's defensive magic array by a significant amount. It had taken a lot of effort to stabilize Zero Wing's development. He naturally could not casually expend a large amount of the guild's combat power for the secret pavilion without appropriate compensation. You'll only dispatch NPC mercenaries? Yuan Tiexin pondered in silence. Their main goal in this transaction to begin with was to gain Zero Wing's JHPs to exchange for NPC mercenaries. If they had enough mercenaries, they could distract the mythic orcs and grand lords inside the city. As for Zero Wing's members, the secret pavilion had never once thought about using them. Alright. However, 10,000 mercenaries are too few. We'll need at least 15,000. That won't be a problem. Feng nodded. He currently possessed 50,000 JHPs. Hiring 15,000 mercenaries would cost him only 45,000 points. To Zero Wing, JHPs were of little use right now. After all, the guild had to invest a significant portion of its income into the development of Zero Wing City. The guild had neither the time nor the money to capture another town or city. Currently, its most important goal was to find a way to make a large amount of coins and magic crystals. Both sides signed a contract with each other. After which, Yuan Tiexin handed 10 black cards to Feng. As for the 2 plots of land, Feng chose to have both plots located in the Apocalypse Empire's Moon Bay City. Although the Apocalypse Empire shared an extensive portion of its borders with the sea, the cities located close to the sea numbered only 4. Moon Bay City was the closest of the 4 to ocean-viewing town. In the future, if need be, he could also use the lands in Moon Bay City as a temporary warehouse. This here is the information I mentioned before. It is best if you all start making preparations soon. When the time comes, not only will the several kingdoms neighboring the Orc Empire be affected, but even the Black Dragon Empire will receive heavy damage. Originally, I had planned on having Jade spar with your guild's experts a little, but now that the contents of our transaction have changed, we have to return and make the corresponding changes, Yuan Tiexin said as he passed an envelope to Feng. He then let out a sigh before leaving together with Purple Jade and his bodyguards. Affecting several kingdoms? Feng could not help but tear open the envelope curiously. After fishing out the paper inside and reading its contents, he immediately sneered and said, "Nine Dragons Emperor really is daring. Is he not afraid of digging his own grave as well?" The message was short and to the point. It merely stated that Nine Dragons Emperor had assisted Beast Emperor in holding a sacrificial ceremony and had already activated the Evil God's Temple in the Black Dragon Empire, which was simply a disaster to the majority of the players in the Empire. The Evil God's Temple located in an empire was entirely different from one located in a kingdom. Its activation not only gave Beast Emperor a huge boost in status, but he would also be able to use the sacrificial altar, which was available only in the Evil God's Temple in empires, allowing the evil beasts and evil demons under his control to fight against each other. Meanwhile, the victors in the sacrificial altar would devour the losers and have their growth potentials improved. With this, Beast Emperor would be able to produce powerful evil beasts and evil demons much more easily. Given enough time, Beast Emperor would even be capable of destroying an entire empire. This was also the reason why the activation of the Evil God's Temple had nearly led to the destruction of an empire in the past. Currently, Beast Emperor was already operating in the Black Dragon Empire and the surrounding kingdoms, continuously killing players and expanding his strength. According to the Secret Pavilion's investigations, the reason why Nine Dragons Emperor had decided to work with Beast Emperor was so that he could use Beast Emperor's strength to annihilate Zero Wing. By doing so, he would be able to deprive Phoenix Rain of a powerful supporter in the competition for Thunder Island. Do you think you can annihilate Zero Wing so easily? Feng smiled. He then tore the letter into pieces. If it were in the past, the activation of the Evil God's Empire in the Black Dragon Empire would indeed have posed a significant threat to him. Now, however, the situation had changed with the completion of Zero Wing City's construction. Whether it was in terms of offense or defense, a city greatly surpassed a town. The only problem now was magic crystals. The defenses of both towns and cities required a large amount of magic crystals to fully display their true potential. It seems there's a need to quickly secure that manatite vein. Feng planned silently. However, the current strength of the guild is still not enough to secure the vein. We'll need more Tier 2 players before we can do so. I'll have to think of a way to help more people get through their Tier 2 promotions. Karna Island, where the manatite vein was located, was very dangerous for Tier 1 players. Only Tier 2 players could possibly serve as combat power there. However, passing the promotion for Tier 2 was easier said than done. Currently, although many players in Zero Wing's main force had already reached level 50, their chances of clearing the hard mode promotion quest remained dismal. Not only would they need better weapons and equipment, but they also had to improve their combat standards. Head Instructor, representatives from the White Tiger Dojo have come to negotiate cooperation with you again. Should I invite them in now? Liang Jing asked as she entered the reception room. Again? Feng frowned as he thought about the White Tiger Dojo's commission. They really are bothersome. Head Instructor, the White Tiger Dojo has come looking for you multiple times already. If you don't meet with them now, I'm afraid this would be... Liang Jing hurriedly tried persuading Feng when she saw that he intended to reject the White Tiger Dojo's representatives out of hand. At this point, she was at a total loss as to Feng's behavior. If it were Chairman Xiao, he would have already gone out to greet the White Tiger Dojo's representatives instead of letting the other party ask to meet him. In contrast, not only did Feng show no interest whatsoever in meeting with the representatives, but he was even planning on shooing them away. The White Tiger Dojo was one of the top dojos in the country. It simply wasn't an existence the Big Dipper Dojo could compare to. If the former wished, it could easily crush the Big Dipper Dojo. However, the more unbelievable matter was how the White Tiger Dojo was behaving. Despite receiving numerous refusals, it was still desperately sending representatives over to meet with Feng. Most likely, if she told this matter to someone else, nobody would believe a word she spoke. Alright then. Let them come in. Feng nodded helplessly at Liang Jing's pleading. I'll bring them over now, Liang Jing said, breathing out a sigh of relief at Feng's words. If she were to send the White Tiger Dojo away again, Chairman Xiao would definitely have a stroke. Chapter 1541, Mysterious Zero Wing. Chapter 1541, Mysterious Zero Wing. Uncle Yuan, what happened? Is it so urgent that there isn't any time for me to have a spar? Purple Jade asked as she looked at Yuan Tiexing curiously. They had agreed that she would have a few sparring matches with Zero Wing's experts. Yet now, after speaking a few words with Feng, they were already taking their leave. This situation truly confused her. She knew full well that the capture of an orc city was not under Yuan Tiexing's management. He had simply said those words to Feng as an excuse to leave. The guild leader has just messaged me that I need to return to handle something. As for sparring with Zero Wing's experts, you can do that inside the simulation training system. Moreover, Zero Wing has just obtained another 10 black cards. With this, Zero Wing's main members will definitely log into the training system more frequently. You can spar with them at any time, Yuan Tiexing replied, smiling. A direct order from the guild leader? What happened? Purple Jade was slightly surprised upon hearing this. The guild leader of the secret pavilion rarely ever commanded a specific person directly. Generally, he would leave the selection of personnel to the vice guild leaders to deal with. Only for extremely important matters would he personally assign someone to handle them. Our men have discovered a treasure land. This location is much more precious than a single orc city. The guild leader wants us to claim it as quickly as possible to avoid losing it to other guilds. Moreover, I'm not the only one the guild leader has given this command. Several other elders of the guild are being mobilized as well. As a precaution, we should start making preparations early. As soon as God's domain system update completes, we'll immediately lead our forces over to that place, Yuan Tiexing said, a hint of excitement in his voice. Even the guild's elders need to go? Purple Jade was even more surprised to hear this. Since the secret pavilion had entered God's domain, this was the first time an operation had warranted the mobilization of multiple elders and a large portion of the upper echelon. Meanwhile, inside the lobby, when Feng Tianji saw Yuan Tiexing's group leaving, he could not help but sigh ruefully. Although the White Tiger Dojo was famous, the partners it was able to find were only first-rate guilds. Super first-rate guilds and super guilds paid no attention whatsoever to the White Tiger Dojo's request for partnership. Yet, now, the secret pavilion, a transcendental existence that the White Tiger Dojo currently could not even hope to have dealings with, had actually sent one of its elders to visit Zero Wing. At the same time, Feng Tianji also felt that this was a good opportunity. Previously, Zero Wing was already the #1 guild of Star Moon Kingdom. Now, he had even discovered that Zero Wing possessed a close relationship with a transcendental existence like the Secret Pavilion. If he could rope Zero Wing to their ship, he would definitely elevate his and Jiang Tianyuan's positions in the White Tiger Dojo. After all, the White Tiger Dojo was currently placing considerable importance on God's domain, so much so that it had started paying more attention to the game than to nurturing fighters for fighting competitions. Otherwise, it wouldn't have suddenly started a mass expansion towards even second and third tier cities. Mr. Feng, head instructor Shi, is currently waiting in reception room 1. Please follow me, Liang Jing said in a somewhat awkward tone as she looked at Feng Tianji, who was currently pondering in silence. All right, Feng Tianji answered hurriedly as he snapped out of his daze. Following which, Feng Tianji and Xie Qiwen followed Liang Jing to reception room 1. Inside the exquisite reception room, Shi Feng currently sat on a leather sofa while sipping a cup of tea. As he sat there, he gave off an indescribably quiet and peaceful feeling, as if he was one with his surroundings. Meanwhile, when Feng Tianji entered the room, he could not help but be stunned when he noticed Shi Feng's presence. Is he really a youngster in his early 20s? Such a thought suddenly popped into Feng Tianji's mind as he looked at Shi Feng. The feeling he got from Shi Feng was something he had only ever felt coming from Jiang Tianyuan. However, Jiang Tianyuan was an expert who had experienced countless battles. Jiang Tianyuan was also the pride and legend of the White Tiger Dojo. At this point, even Feng Tianji was far from capable of melding himself with his surrounding environment. Well, what are you here for this time? Shi Feng said as he looked at Feng Tianji and Xie Qiwen. Hello, head instructor Shi. My name is Feng Tianji, an instructor at the White Tiger Dojo, Feng Tianji said, smiling as he introduced himself. As for the purpose of our visit this time, it is to discuss matters of cooperation. Cooperation? What kind of cooperation? If it's still the same as last time, I believe I've already stated my conditions to you very clearly. At this moment, Shi Feng was no longer that interested in the deal Jiang Tianyuan had offered him. Nurturing 506 floor experts in 1 month was a considerably difficult task. Right now he did not have that much time to spare. You? Xie Qiwen's complexion darkened immediately when he heard Shi Feng's words. On the other hand, Liang Jing turned pale at this sight. She felt that Shi Feng was going too far with his actions. After all, the other party represented the White Tiger Dojo. Not even Chairman Xiao dared to blatantly reject a request from the White Tiger Dojo. If they provoked the White Tiger Dojo, the consequences would simply be unimaginable. However, before Xie Qiwen could get anything else out of his mouth, Feng Tianji immediately stopped him. Previously, our people failed to state things clearly to you, so the fault is on our side, Feng Tianji said, still smiling. However, this time we have come with sincerity. As long as you can help us nurture 506 floor trial tower experts, you are free to state your price. Feng Tianji's words dumbfounded Liang Jing and Xie Qiwen. Liang Jing had never imagined that the White Tiger Dojo, which normally did not take even the chairman of Big Dipper seriously, would actually use such a polite tone with Shi Feng. Meanwhile, Xie Qiwen was feeling even greater shock than Liang Jing. Feng Tianji of the White Tiger Dojo was a true killing god. Aside from those holding the position of branch hall master and above, nobody in the White Tiger Dojo dared to go against Feng Tianji's words. You're letting me set the price? Shi Feng was a little surprised. He had never thought that the White Tiger Dojo would change attitude so quickly. Of course, as long as it is a price the White Tiger Dojo can afford. Feng Tianji nodded. All right. I don't want much, just 100 bottles of S-rank nutrient fluids, Shi Feng stated. Feng Tianji found himself in an awkward position. Although he had said that Shi Feng could set the price, he had never expected the latter to be so brazen as to ask for such a high price. Big bro Tianji, he is clearly toying with us. Xie Qiwen could not help but explode in anger when he heard Shi Feng's words. Did Shi Feng think S-rank nutrient fluid was tap water? Even a branch dojo would not receive 100 bottles of S-rank nutrient fluids in an entire year. Only the main branch could take out so many bottles at once. However, these S-rank nutrient fluids were normally prepared for international competitions. It was simply impossible for them to spend so many just for a game. Is 100 bottles too much for you? Feng could not help but ask when he saw the troubled look on Feng Tianji's face. It really is beyond of our capabilities, Feng Tianji said, cold sweat dotting his furrowed brows. Although Jiang Tianyuan's position in the White Tiger Dojo was very high, the man could draw only 30 bottles of S-rank nutrient fluids at a time. Even if he bankrupted himself, he wouldn't be able to gather 100 bottles. Alright then. 60 bottles and not a bottle lower. Feng said, sighing. Otherwise, you will have to find someone better for the job. What do you think of? Before Xie Qiwen could even finish his sentence, Feng Tianji had already placed a hand on his shoulder. His body suddenly felt heavy, and his mouth couldn't utter any more words. Head instructor, sure, it is also going to be very difficult for us to get you 60 bottles. How about this? We are willing to pay you 50 bottles of S-rank nutrient fluids in addition to 20 million credits. This is already the limit of what we can offer. You should also know that S-rank nutrient fluids are not sold anywhere on the market and can be obtained only through internal channels. Even the White Tiger Dojo can get only a small amount each year, Feng Tianji said seriously after taking a deep breath. Upon hearing Feng Tianji's words, Xie Qiwen felt as if the man sitting beside him right now was definitely an actor. There was simply no way the person beside him was the real Feng Tianji. Those were 50 bottles of S-rank nutrient fluids they were talking about. 50? Feng fell into deep thought. After some time he said, all right, I can agree to your proposal. However, I will not accept payment in installments. Zero Wing was currently in urgent need of S-rank nutrient fluids. If he could get those 50 bottles now, they would undoubtedly help Fire Dance and the others improve much more quickly. He could also help them develop their potential early on. Feng Tianji could not help but fall speechless at Feng's words. At the same time, however, he also inwardly breathed out a sigh of relief. Following which, Feng Tianji signed a contract with Feng, agreeing to deliver 50 bottles of S-rank nutrient fluids and 20 million credits within 5 days. As for the 500 White Tiger Dojo apprentices to be nurtured by Zero Wing, he would send Feng a list of names after he logged back into God's domain. With the negotiations completed, Feng Tianji left together with Xie Qiwen to report back to Jiang Tianyuan. As for Feng, after taking a look at the time, he noticed that God's domain system update was already completed. He immediately returned to his room and logged back into the game. Chapter 1542, God's Domains Changes. Chapter 1542, God's Domains Changes. What's going on? As soon as Feng logged back into the game, he was shocked by the scene that greeted him. He had been standing in the middle of a dense forest when he logged out of the game. Now, however, endless plains surrounded him. Moreover, large craters pitted the plains. Not only was the air filled with dust and yellow sand, but even the ambient mana had become extremely thin. He even felt his reactions becoming a little sluggish due to this low mana environment. If not for the abyssal blade gathering mana around his body, his combat power definitely would have decreased significantly. Meanwhile, the other Zero Wing members that just logged into the game were similarly stupefied by the scene before them. Look at the sky. What's that? Someone in the crowd suddenly shouted, pointing up at the sky. When everyone looked up, they quickly spotted the faint silhouette of a pitch-black ship hovering in the dusky sky. Due to the dark gray clouds that served as a backdrop, if one did not look carefully, they would not notice the ship at all. A magic warship? Feng could not help but be shocked. That emblem belongs to the royal family. Why is something like that here? A magic warship was an actual strategic weapon as well as one of the trump cards of Starmoon Kingdom. Normally, the kingdom would not mobilize its magic warship even during a war with other countries. A magic warship was like a war fortress, capable of casting Tier 5 spells and destroying towns in a single hit. Meanwhile, the magic warship controlled by the royal family was even more powerful as it could use Tier 5 curses. Only during the invasion of the Abyss would the royal family utilize this weapon of mass destruction. Yet, now, the magic warship operated by the royal family was currently patrolling this location. Feng found this simply inconceivable. Could the invasion of the Orc Empire have already gotten that grim? Feng could not help entertaining such a thought. Immediately, he had Aqua Rose send people to investigate this matter. Whenever a new expansion pack took effect, the system would provide information relevant to the expansion pack in the affected regions. Meanwhile, players could obtain this information by asking the NPCs in the affected towns and cities. At this moment, Starmoon Kingdom wasn't the only country in turmoil. The several kingdoms and 2 empires neighboring the Orc Empire were similarly in turmoil. These countries were all mobilizing their trump cards and organizing a frenzied assault on the orcs. Very quickly, Aqua Rose collected the information gathered by members of the guild and summarized it in a report. Guild leader, based on the information we've found thus far, the orcs seem to be frantically searching for something. They keep sending out invasion squads to the neighboring kingdoms and empires. Moreover, many powerful mutated orcs have appeared among these orcs, posing a huge headache for these kingdoms and empires. After suffering numerous defeats, these countries have finally mobilized their trump cards to push back the orcs. In addition, the affected kingdoms and empires have come to an agreement to remove the border teleportation fees temporarily. Teleportation between these kingdoms will be calculated similar to normal city teleportation fee rates. At the same time, the allied countries have launched a unified crusade against the Orc Empire. Now, many new items have been made available for exchange using the guild honor points and contribution points earned in the war with the Orc Empire. In the exchange system for individual players, level 40+ warrior sets have appeared. The sets are available in bronze rank to dark gold rank. However, the sets are bound upon exchange and cannot be traded. Meanwhile, in the exchange system for guilds, the guild magic car lease has appeared. As Aqua Rose summarized the information she had received, she could not help her surprise at the changes brought about by the system update this time. These changes would undoubtedly shake up the current status quo between guilds. Without the extra fees charged for teleporting between countries, players would be able to move between countries more easily. The removal of this hurdle would also increase the intensity of competition between the guilds of the various affected countries. Guild magic car lease? Feng's eyes glowed when he heard Aqua Rose mention this term. The guild magic car lease was a great convenience for guilds. Meanwhile, the lease dropped only in specific super large-scale team dungeons in each country. One could also say that it served as proof of a guild's strength. After a guild acquired the guild magic car lease, its members would be able to rent guild magic cars at the guild's residences. The magic car was a very useful tool for teams. Unlike advanced carriages, which could travel only on the official roads built between towns and cities, the magic car could go to any location. It also doubled as a tent and allowed players to recover their concentration and stamina inside it. Overall, the magic car was like a mobile camp and was particularly useful to teams that preferred exploring distant and high-level locations. Guild leader, is there a problem? Aqua Rose asked curiously when she saw the astonished expression on Feng's face. How many GHPs does that guild magic car lease require? Feng asked immediately. If Zero Wing could obtain the guild magic car lease now, it would definitely help in traveling to the neutral map Boneless Land. Erecting advanced constructions like the advanced restaurant or the magic workshop required mana Oregon. Yet, mana ore was not easy to obtain. It was a byproduct that would appear at a very low chance when mining rare ores. Although mana ore still turned up on the market quite frequently, the various large guilds and players were all trying to obtain mana ore to create the mana charm, due to the Orc Empire's appearance. As a result, the mana ore put up for sale had been wiped clean off the shelves. In fact, even the mana ore of other kingdoms and empires around God's domain had been bought out by the various large guilds. Right now, it was practically impossible to obtain mana ore in large quantities. However, Feng still knew of a way to obtain a large amount of mana ore, through the distant neutral map Boneless Land. There were quite a few rare ore veins in the Boneless Land. In the past, the neutral map was famous as a producer of mana Oregon. Only, the Boneless Land was not a place current players could travel to. Even if players went there via the safest route, they would have to traverse over a dozen high-level maps ranging between level 100 to level 130. Moreover, as the Boneless Land was a neutral map, there were no nearby towns or cities for players to recuperate in. Normally, the various large guilds would construct a town or city in a neutral map before starting their development there, which was clearly an impossible task right now. However, it was a different story if players had the guild magic car. Resting inside a magic car was equivalent to resting inside a hotel. Although a magic car had a maximum capacity of 20 players, its effects were the same as a hotel's. It could provide players with the best recovery effects for their concentration and stamina. Meanwhile, the boneless land itself was not particularly high-leveled, merely a level 60 to level 80 neutral map. Using the spatial gate, he could transport a large number of players there. After including a temporary resting place like the guild magic car, it would be relatively simple for them to mine for mana Oregon. The only expenses would be the high rental fees and magic crystals to operate the magic cars. Overall, however, it would still be much cheaper and simpler than directly purchasing mana or from the market. The guild magic car lease requires 200,000 GHPs and 1 3-star achievement in exchange, Aqua Rose replied. Sure enough, the system won't let players obtain it easily. Feng could not help but smile bitterly upon hearing the cost. Even super guilds would need a very long time to accumulate 200,000 GHPs. As for the 3-star achievement, that was even harder to obtain. A 3-star achievement was like a kingdom quest. A kingdom would only award a guild such an achievement when said guild had achieved significant victories in wars against other countries. Meanwhile, not only was this achievement a symbol of honor, but it was also proof of the influence a guild had in a kingdom. Despite a 3-star achievement being the lowest ranking achievement available, obtaining one was significantly more difficult than even an epic main storyline quest. One could say that the difficulty of obtaining a 3-star achievement was no less than that of raiding a super large-scale team dungeon. Hence, by introducing the guild magic car lease now, the system was merely allowing the various large guilds to come into contact with guild magic cars a little earlier. Whether the various large guilds were actually able to take advantage of this opportunity was not a certainty. Forget it. For now, I should find Celiura first and deal with the disintegration armor. Thinking up to this point, Feng had Aqua Rose make the necessary arrangements to shift the guild's development direction towards the Orc Empire. As for himself, he used a return scroll and teleported back to White River City. Chapter 1543, Upgrading White River City. Chapter 1543, Upgrading White River City. Starmoon Kingdom, White River City. As soon as Feng exited the teleportation hall, he noticed that the street outside the building teemed with merchant players originating from other kingdoms, selling and purchasing items. Due to the system update this time, players from the neighboring kingdoms and empires would no longer have to transit through Starmoon City and could teleport directly to White River City. As a result, business in White River City was flourishing like never before. Moreover, aside from merchant players, there were also plenty of foreign guilds and adventurer teams that had come to White River City. Evidently, the reduction in teleportation fees convinced the guilds and adventurer teams that were previously hesitating to visit White River City to make the trip. So this is White River City? Business here is flourishing. There are at least twice as many merchants here as there are in our northern kingdom's capital city. How are the players here so high-leveled? What? This city has already activated the flying transportation system? The various foreign large guilds and adventurer teams could not help but marvel at the prosperity of White River City. Previously they had heard talk about White River City. Although rumor had it that players were labeling White River City as Starmoon Kingdom's #1 NPC city, they had merely treated it as a joke before. After all, how could a non-capital city possibly compete with a capital city? If a situation like this really happened in a kingdom, then that could only mean one thing: said kingdom was extremely weak. Moreover, the fact that Starmoon Kingdom's #1 guild was actually a guild recently established in God's domain only served as further proof that Starmoon Kingdom was a weak kingdom. If not for the fact that the teleportation fees were much reduced and the fact that White River City possessed a teleportation house that led directly to the heart of the Twin Towers Kingdom, they would not have bothered paying a visit to White River City at all. However, now that they got to see White River City in person, the city was worlds apart from what they had imagined it to be. Every one of the merchant players hawking their wares on the streets sold exquisite items. There were even some that sold level 40 fine gold weapons and level 45 fine gold equipment. Normally, such items could only occasionally be found in the auction houses of capital cities. Yet now players were selling them on the street. Moreover, the temporary teams recruiting members for dungeon raids were even more amazing. There were actually players recruiting for level 40, 100-man hard mode team dungeons raids. Although many players in God's domain had already reached level 40, when raiding level 40, 100-man team dungeons, level 40 was merely the baseline limit. Moreover, that was only in the case of normal mode. For hard mode, a team would require at least 10 expert players belonging to large guilds to spearhead the raid. Either that or a well-established adventurer team. Temporary teams should already be thanking their lucky stars if they could clear the normal mode of a 100-man team dungeon. Trying to raid a 100-man hard mode team dungeon was simply a dream. However, before the foreign guild players could speak any contemptuous words about the various temporary teams, they were immediately silenced when their sights fell on the level and equipment of the recruiting teams. The members of the recruiting teams were all level 41 and above. Meanwhile, even the most inferior piece of equipment they wore was level 35 secret silver rank, while some even wore level 40 secret silver equipment. As for the players serving as the leaders of these teams, they were mostly geared in level 40 fine gold equipment and level 35 dark gold equipment. Even the elite teams of large guilds would be slightly inferior when compared to these teams. Haha. Another batch of dumbfounded newcomers has arrived. They sure have guts to think of White River City as an ordinary NPC city. If they're already reacting in such a way after just exiting the teleportation hall, once they reach the business district in the central area, their eyes will most likely fall out of their sockets. Weren't you the same as them before? That's because I knew absolutely nothing about White River City back then. Moreover, unlike them, I came here because I wanted to join Zero Wing. Unfortunately, Zero Wing's recruitment standards are a little too high. Had the standards been lowered by just a little bit, I definitely would have gotten in on my last attempt. Alright, that's enough. The meeting time the team leader mentioned has already arrived. Today we'll definitely get through the first boss of that 100-man hell mode team dungeon. That's for sure. I heard that the team leader used the super rare materials we obtained previously to exchange for 3 advanced mana armor kits from the Candlelight trading firm. With those armor kits, we should have no problems getting through the first boss. Several players belonging to an adventurer team were currently chatting merrily while sitting inside an open-air bar. When they saw the surprised looks on the newly arrived foreign players' faces, their hearts swelled with an indescribable sense of pride. Meanwhile, when the foreign players, both the members of large guilds and well-known adventurer teams belonging to other kingdoms, passing by heard the words of these local players, they could not help but be shocked. At this stage of the game, very few adventurer teams, aside from those at the top, were capable of raiding level 40 100-man hell mode team dungeons. Even the first boss of such dungeons was already an insurmountable hurdle. Yet, the players sitting inside the bar spoke as if being able to raid such a boss was no big deal. This situation filled the foreign guilds and adventurer teams that had just arrived at White River City with shock and awe. Just what kind of city was White River City? At the same time, these foreign players also began sending messages to their friends, telling them about White River City. For a time, White River City's fame spread rapidly throughout the neighboring kingdoms and empires. More and more players also began considering moving their base of operations to White River City. It seems the new expansion pack I activated this time has brought quite a lot of benefits to Zero Wing's development. Feng could not help but smile when he overheard the conversations of players on the street. With this, even without linking a teleportation array to Zero Wing City, White River City still has a chance to become a main city. In God's domain, NPC cities were not static. They could similarly be upgraded. Only many conditions needed to be met before it would happen. Chief among these conditions related to player population and trade volume. If Feng wished to upgrade White River City once more, he would first need to get the city's population to 10 million. Originally, this should have been a very difficult task to accomplish. Now, however, due to the lowering of the barrier known as teleportation fees, increasing the player population of White River City would no longer pose any challenge. Meanwhile, as long as White River City was upgraded again, it would activate the corresponding city functions. At that time, not only would the city undergo even greater changes, but more destinations would also be added to the flying transportation system, allowing players to travel to those distant neutral maps that did not boast any teleportation arrays. It seems there's a need to have Candlelight introduce some new products. At this time, Feng suddenly recalled the mana-enhancing potion recipe he obtained recently. Berserk-type potions like the mana-enhancing potion were amazingly effective in dungeon raids. It was a potion that the various adventurer teams and small guilds urgently required at the moment. If he sold this potion in White River City, it would definitely cause a huge commotion and attract even more players to the city. Following which, Feng contacted Melancholic Smile and had her select the advanced alchemist with the highest success rate in the Candlelight trading firm to produce the mana-enhancing potion. An advanced alchemy recipe? Melancholic Smile's eyes glowed upon hearing this. I'll get it done right away. Shortly after Feng contacted Melancholic Smile, the advanced carriage he was riding arrived before Ciliora's smithy. Unlike other Grandmaster Forgers, Ciliora had not moved to a better city. She remained inside her inconspicuous smithy, hammering away at materials in the hopes of creating a fragmented legendary item. This place has been discovered already? When Feng arrived before the smithy, he noticed over a dozen forging players in front of the smithy. Every one of them was currently standing before the entrance of the house silently, none of them daring to make a sound in fear of disturbing Ciliora, who was still working inside right now. Surprisingly though, while around half of the dozen or so players lined up outside the building consisted of level 33 lifestyle players, the other half were actually expert players who were level 46 and above. Meanwhile, standing at the head of this group of experts was a man and a woman. Although both currently had their levels hidden using a black cloak, they did not bother concealing their facial appearances. Why is she here? Feng grew a little confused when he saw these two players. While he had no idea who the man was, the woman was someone he was considerably familiar with. After all, this woman was none other than Yulan, part of the upper echelon of the organization Underworld. From what Feng remembered, Yulan should have long since been assigned to continue her development in another kingdom. Yet, for some reason she had actually appeared in Starmoon Kingdom again. Chapter 1544, First Ghost. Chapter 1544, First Ghost. Before Feng could snap out of his daze, he suddenly felt killing intent directed towards him. Meanwhile, this killing intent came from the level 46+ players. At this moment, these experts were on high alert against him and wore a look that stated they would unsheath their weapons and were poised to attack. This situation threw Feng into confusion. Currently, he had both his level and appearance hidden using a black cloak, yet the other party had tensed up just at his approach. Alright, enough. He should be here to meet with Ciliora, the man beside Yulan said as he made a waving motion with his hand. Only after hearing this man's words did the experts relax. Fellow friends, sorry about that. My brothers here are just a little too nervous. They have no ill intent, the young man standing in the lead apologized. It's fine. Feng simply gave a quiet response. In God's domain, players would normally become alert when they came across a cloaked player that hid all information about themselves. However, very few players would react as the experts in Yulan's group had while inside an NPC city. After all, there were many NPC soldiers patrolling the city streets, making an assassination very difficult unless the targeted player was caught entirely unaware. Of course, players who suffered frequent ambushes out in the fields would also form a habit of instinctively going into high alert when encountering cloaked players. Following which, Feng stopped paying attention to Yulan's group and walked straight towards the smithy's door. Although he was curious as to why Yulan had suddenly reappeared in White River City, his priority right now was to deal with the disintegration armor. If he left the armor as it was, he would definitely have difficulty moving around. Just as Feng was about to knock on the door, however, a playful voice suddenly came from behind him. You guys really made me work up a sweat finding you. With things as they are right now, do you all still think you have a chance? Turning around, Feng suddenly noticed that a group of over 100 cloaked players had appeared behind him. Every one of these cloaked players wore a sneer on their faces. A moment later, a middle-aged man wearing pitch-black leather armor gradually emerged from the shadows of this group of cloaked players. The instant this middle-aged man appeared, a gray fog started permeating the air around him. He gave off an indescribably chilling and creepy feeling. First Ghost? They actually sent an expert like you after us as well? The youth standing beside Yulan revealed a bitter smile when he saw the middle-aged man. At this moment, aside from the youth, the several other experts standing around Yulan also wore horrified expressions when they looked at the middle-aged man before them. After all, the middle-aged man was once known as the #1 assassin of Underworld. He was so strong that even if their entire group attacked him together, they would only end up getting unilaterally slaughtered. Furthermore, escaping his grasp was impossible, as the assassin class was known to possess the highest speed among the 12 main classes. They wouldn't particularly mind if they simply lost their lives right now. However, First Ghost and his group had consumed the haunted potion. Anyone he and his allies killed would drop multiple pieces of equipment. Dark Eye, I believe that the higher-ups have already stated that either you all submit or die. Since you all refuse to submit, I have no choice but to send you on your way. First Ghost said as he unsheathed the snowy white dagger hanging from his waist. Taking into account the fact that we were colleagues in the past, I'll give you a word of advice. Delete your accounts as soon as possible. The higher-ups won't let you all keep those items. Or do you really believe you can escape our pursuit? Yulan, bring everyone and escape quickly. The few of us here will hold them back. Once you reach the main street, they won't be able to take action easily, the youth named Dark Eye said quietly to Yulan. Hearing this, Yulan gritted her teeth and nodded. Although she wished to break out of this encirclement together with Dark Eye and the others, doing so was clearly an impossible feat. Setting aside the fact that they were greatly outnumbered right now, First Ghost alone was more than capable of defeating her entire group. You guys think you can escape? As long as I am here, none of you should even think of leaving this place alive. First Ghost obviously saw through Dark Eye's plans. Sneering, he ordered, "Go. Leave none of them alive." Immediately, the 100-plus players behind First Ghost went into action. The melee players charged forward, the healers in the rear cast shield buffs on the melee players, and the ranged players locked on to the movements of Yulan's group. There were also over a dozen stealthed assassins stationed at the sidelines on the off chance that someone from Yulan's group actually managed to get through the encirclement. At the same time, First Ghost took out a dark gray scroll and unfurled it. As he activated it, the surrounding space suddenly turned blurry. This scroll contained the basic magic array perception blur. It was a special scroll that could be bought only in towns and cities operated by the Dark Forces. So long as this scroll was activated, it would transform the surrounding space, making it difficult for NPCs within towns and cities to perceive the movements inside the affected area. Unless the affected area lay in an NPC soldier's direct line of sight, it would be some time before the NPC soldiers would realize that a fight was going on inside the city. Damn it, they came prepared. Dark Eye immediately fell into despair when he saw the dark gray magic array rising into the air. Although the magic array First Ghost used was only a basic one, players would still need to spend some time breaking through it. During this period, First Ghost's group was more than capable of killing them several times over. I've already said that none of you should think of leaving this place alive, First Ghost said as he strolled up to Dark Eye and Yulan. He showed nary a hint of nervousness even though he was assaulting another player inside an NPC city. In fact, he did not even bother using the assassin class's stealth skill and was boldly waltzing towards his opponents. This approach was one of the reasons why the members of Underworld deeply feared the man known as First Ghost. He could not only overwhelm his opponents through martial might but also constant grind away at his opponent's mental state. Unable to cope with the mental pressure, a level 46 berserker abruptly used charge at the confident assassin. Upon arriving before First Ghost, he immediately brandished his greatsword with all his might. Cross slash. The berserker smoothly entered the stance to execute cross slash and swung his greatsword down on First Ghost. Dang. Following which, the clash of metal rang out. Surprisingly, First Ghost's flimsy dagger actually stopped the berserker's greatsword. Immediately after, the dagger had even proceeded to push aside the greatsword. First Ghost had repelled the attack so easily that he looked as if he was just swatting away a small pebble. How is this possible? The berserker's face was filled with astonishment when he saw his greatsword getting shoved aside so readily. He simply could not understand how an assassin could possess such immense strength. Meanwhile, by the time the berserker snapped out of his daze, First Ghost's other dagger had already appeared before his eyes. In the end, the berserker could only watch helplessly as the dagger slashed across his throat. Immediately after slashing the berserker's throat, First Ghost suddenly transformed into a streak of shadow and pierced through the berserker's body. Tier 1 skill Absolute Strike. When First Ghost's body reformed, the berserker's HP began decreasing rapidly. A second later, the berserker collapsed to the ground. In such a way, a level 46 berserker on Yulan's side died as soon as the battle began. Next up will be you, First Ghost said as he sent a glance at Dark Eye. He then started pacing casually towards the youth. After seeing the brief battle, Dark Eye and the several experts around him could not help but shudder as if they were looking at a literal ghost right now. Come. I want to see just what Underworld's #1 assassin is capable of. Dark Eye knew that there was no way he was leaving this place alive. The only thing he could do now was fight to the death. He dashed at First Ghost, then activated the Berserker class's Tier 1 taboo skill, Wind Slash. Countless wind blades flew towards First Ghost simultaneously. Meanwhile, Dark Eye was in control of the movements of every one of these wind blades, which completely sealed First Ghost's movements. As for Dark Eye himself, after activating Wind Slash, he promptly sent a downward slash at First Ghost's defensive blind spot. In the next moment, Dark Eye's greatsword could be seen passing through First Ghost's body. However, just as Dark Eye's companions were about to cheer in joy, Dark Eye's expression turned inexplicably grim, because his attack had not struck First Ghost at all. All he had done was slash at the assassin's afterimage. Instinctively he swung his sword horizontally. Whirlwind Slash. Dang. Sparks flew and scattered into the surroundings. In the next moment, Dark Eye's silvery gray greatsword could be seen stopped roughly 4 inches away from First Ghost's body. Despite Dark Eye putting all his strength into his arms, the pitch-black dagger blocking his greatsword refused to budge by even a centimeter farther. Meanwhile, the silver dagger in First Ghost's other hand smoothly stabbed towards Dark Eye's side abdomen. Is it over? Dark Eye could not help but shut his eyes at this scene. The difference in strength between him and First Ghost was simply too massive. Not only was he inferior to the assassin in terms of technical standards, but even his basic attributes were greatly inferior to the assassin's. Die. First Ghost promptly added even more power to his attack. Just as the silver dagger was about to stab into Dark Eye's abdomen, however, a red flash suddenly entered First Ghost's sight. Shocked, First Ghost hurriedly activated wind steps to block the attack. He then beat an abrupt retreat and turned to look towards the source of the red flash. Who interrupted me? I did. At this time, Feng stepped out of the group of players standing before Siliora's smithy. Chapter 1545. Unbearable Wrath? As Feng emerged from the crowd, the present players' gazes shifted towards him. Although Feng had concealed his appearance, he was obviously a swordsman based on the 2 long swords hanging at his waist. This brat must be tired of living. He actually dares to ruin the boss's fun. He must be suicidal. He should realize that he can't survive this. Is he that eager to die? The boss must be furious. That kid is definitely going to suffer for this. Although First Ghost team members were surprised to see Feng save Dark Eye, their expressions quickly turned to that of pity and admiration. As a bystander, Feng could have remained silent, and First Ghost would have given him a quick death, but now that he had spoiled the man's fun, his death would be slow and painful. After all, First Ghost was famous for his brutality in Underworld. Other players had interrupted First Ghost in the past, and he had slowly shaved off these players' HP with one hit after another. Sometimes he even had his team's healers recover his target's HP. Experts generally set their pain sensitivity in-game to a certain percentage, and it couldn't be altered while in battle. First Ghost's team members could already imagine the fate that would befall this swordsman stranger. Is he the one that saved me? Dark Eye turned to Feng with a confused expression. He had never thought that a passerby like Feng would actually save him. In his opinion, passers-by usually tried to avoid getting involved with others' disputes. Unfortunately, even if Feng had saved him once, it wouldn't change the outcome. First Ghost's team members had already surrounded their team, and the perception blur magic array prevented NPC soldiers from detecting their fight. This person is, Yulan, who stood in the back, could not help but feel a sense of familiarity as she stared at Feng's back. She seemed to have heard his voice somewhere before as well. Kid, you did that just now? First Ghost didn't hurry to attack Feng. Instead, he evaluated this swordsman carefully. A moment later he sneered and said, "You have guts, I'll give you that. I had intended to let a bystander like you live, but I've changed my mind." "Let me live." Feng laughed. "Keep that devil's compassion to yourself." "You saw through that, huh?" Since Feng hadn't bought the lie, First Ghost admitted to it. He chuckled before replying, "Indeed. I never had any intention of letting you get away, but your actions have only earned you a more painful death. Kid, you're going to regret stepping in. Restless, make sure to heal this kid and keep him alive for me. Everyone else, keep an eye on Dark Eye and Yulan. Rest assured, boss. Until you say, stop, I'll make sure he doesn't die." With First Ghost's command, his teammates turned their focus to Yulan's team. If any of those players moved strangely, they'd bombard them with attacks. At the same time, a level 47 cleric in blue robes kept a close eye on Feng's HP, a hint of playfulness flashing in his eyes as he prepared to cast a healing spell. As soon as First Ghost finished speaking, he appeared behind Feng. Shadow steps. Like a venomous snake, the pitch-black dagger in First Ghost's hand formed an arc as it curved toward Feng's flank. Kidney strike. As the dagger aimed for Feng's blind spot, First Ghost curved his other dagger towards the swordsman's head, ensuring that the silver dagger was barely visible in the corner of his target's eye. Crap. That's First Ghost's double snake bite. Dark Eye's expression darkened as he watched the two daggers flash towards Feng from different angles. When a player noticed an incoming attack, they instinctively tried to block the attack while ignoring those they couldn't see. First Ghost's technique took advantage of this reaction to break past his opponent's defense. Although this technique looked simple, finding an opponent's blind spots in an instant and launching an attack without unnecessary movement was extremely difficult. A player would also have to execute a second attack simultaneously from an entirely different angle. Moreover, due to the attack's lightning speed and precise timing, the technique was nearly impossible for an ordinary expert to counter. First Ghost had killed many powerful experts with this technique. Just before the two daggers bit into Feng, everyone saw a blue flash. Pum. Following which, the sound of metal on metal echoed throughout the street. Suddenly, First Ghost stumbled back 2 steps, his HP falling by over 200. On the other hand, Feng remained steadily in his original position. His HP was also intact. How is this possible? First Ghost's companions were dumbfounded after watching Feng repel the double snake bite. Impossible. Even Dark Eye stared at Feng in disbelief. Feng had actually repulsed Underworld's #1 assassin with 1 hit. Moreover, judging by Feng's expression, it was clear that the swordsman wasn't satisfied with his counterattack. What Dark Eye did not know was that Feng currently suffered a 50% basic attribute reduction thanks to the disintegration armor in his bag. Had Feng been at his peak, his counterattack would have killed First Ghost or left the assassin near death's door. The outcome wouldn't have been a mere 200 HP loss. When First Ghost noticed that his hands trembled after receiving Feng's counterattack, his expression hardened as he glared at Feng and asked, "Who are you?" Even if First Ghost were stupid, he'd realize that Feng was no ordinary expert. The counterattack Feng had used to negate his double snake bite had been so fast that his senses had barely kept up with the strike. No ordinary expert could achieve such a feat. "Who am I?" "I'm just an ordinary bystander that you want to kill," Feng said, chuckling. "An ordinary bystander? My double snake bite can instant-kill Refinement Realm experts if I catch them off guard," First Ghost snapped, annoyed as he glared at Feng. He had not expected to come across a difficult opponent like Feng during his assassination of Yolan's team. "So, that's double snake bite? I don't see anything special about it." Shifting through his memories, Feng realized that First Ghost had indeed launched his attacks simultaneously. However, he did not pay any special attention to this. After reaching the Void Realm, he had a clear grasp of any movement in his surroundings. He lacked the visual blind spots ordinary players suffered. Hence, to him, it merely looked as if First Ghost had simply thrust both of his daggers at once and nothing more. What bold words. "Boss, let us take him on. I want to see just what kind of ability this kid has." Feng's statement enraged the assassin's team members. As long as First Ghost gave the command, they'd send Feng to meet his maker. However, rather than reacting rashly, First Ghost calmly and coldly declared, "Although I don't know who you are, Underworld wants the people behind you dead. Underworld's wrath isn't something you can endure. Boss, why bother wasting words on him? Let's just get rid of this brat. We'll teach him the consequences of his arrogance." All of First Ghost's team members stared at Feng as if he were already a dead man walking. "Can't endure Underworld's wrath?" Feng chuckled. He then removed his black cloak and exposed his adjusted appearance. "I'm very curious to learn what Underworld can do to me." Chapter 1546, Sword King. Chapter 1546, Sword King. Black Flame? The battlefield fell deathly silent when Feng removed his black cloak. Everyone here was familiar with Black Flame. Even players from outside of Starmoon Kingdom would know of him if they examined the God's Domain ranking list. Recently, Black Flame's ranking had risen. He now ranked 31st on God's Domain ranking list. There was also plenty of information regarding the man's battle records. Not only could Black Flame wander through an army of thousands of enemy players as if he were strolling through his own backyard, but he was also undefeated. Even super guilds had to take this expert seriously. Moreover, Black Flame was the guild leader of Zero Wing, the current #1 guild in Starmoon Kingdom. Sword King Black Flame? Dark Eye felt as if he were dreaming as he gazed at Feng. He was also relieved that he had stopped his teammates from attacking Feng. Otherwise, this swordsman would have killed his companions before First Ghost's team had even arrived. Although Dark Eye had never personally witnessed Feng in battle, he knew that this man's guild had caused Underworld a lot of suffering. The organization had even been forced to abandon its development in Starmoon Kingdom. Why is he here? Yolan's eyes widened in shock as she stared at Feng. Meanwhile, when First Ghost found out about his opponent's identity, his complexion turned indescribably grim. If his opponent had merely been a top-tier expert from a first-rate guild, he would not have considered this swordsman important, but that wasn't the case for the player before him. Every player ranked among the top 100 on the God's Domain ranking list could strike fear in the various large guilds, not to mention the 31st ranking expert. Even a superpower would have to dispatch numerous peak experts to deal with an expert of Feng's caliber. It would also need the terrain advantage. Otherwise it would have no hope of defeating Feng. Although First Ghost acknowledged his team's strength, he didn't believe that they were capable of defeating Feng in a head-on confrontation. On top of that, they were still in White River City. If the fight drug on, the NPC patrols would discover them. None of them would leave this place alive. He had merely come to assassinate Yulan and her team. He had never expected to encounter the most troublesome player in Starmoon Kingdom. Black Flame, I admit that you are powerful. In the past, Underworld couldn't even touch you. But do you really think that the organization hasn't changed in all this time? First Ghost no longer showed any intention of attacking. Instead, he sneered and said, "The Blackwater Corporation has already annexed Underworld. Not even God's Domain's various superpowers would dare to provoke Underworld now. The higher-ups have declared that Yolan's team must be killed to level 0. If you shelter them, you will endanger the guild you've gone to great lengths to develop. As long as you keep your nose out of this, you will continue to reign as Starmoon Kingdom's overlord. However, if you anger the people in charge, Zero Wing won't get away unscathed. Is it worth getting in the middle of this?" When they heard First Ghost's warning, Dark Eye, Yulan, and their companions paled. As First Ghost had said, the Blackwater Corporation had taken control of Underworld. Even super guilds avoided confrontations with the corporation if they could. It simply wasn't an existence Zero Wing could contend with. There was no reason for Feng to start a war with the Blackwater Corporation over their fate. Meanwhile, when First Ghost team members heard their leader's words, they regained their confidence and sneered at Feng. When First Ghost finished speaking, Feng glanced at the assassin and asked, "Are you done?" First Ghost was stunned. "Do you even understand what I'm saying? If you involve yourself, you will declare war on the Blackwater Corporation," First Ghost reiterated. However, by the time First Ghost shut his mouth, Feng had appeared before him, his sacred sword radiating a blue glow as it descended on the assassin. Tier 2 Taboo skill Instant Strike. Before First Ghost could use his Vanish skill, his HP had begun to deplete rapidly. In the blink of an eye, his HP fell to 0 and his vision darkened. His body then collapsed, a piece of equipment dropping beside his corpse. "Boss. The boss is dead. This person is insane. Didn't he understand the boss's warning?" First Ghost's team members gaped, horror filling their eyes as they stared at Feng, who wore a casual expression. "When you return, tell your higher-ups that we will not allow other powers to cause trouble in White River City as they like," Feng coldly declared as he glanced at the players around him. "If they dare, this will be their outcome." White River City was Zero Wing's main headquarters. If Zero Wing could not maintain the city's safety, allowing other players to waltz in and kill whom they liked, who would possibly develop in White River City? Furthermore, First Ghost had tried to kill other players right before his very eyes. So strong. He's even stronger than the rumors say. Dark Eye was indescribably shocked as he looked at First Ghost's corpse. Underworld's top assassin had died without the chance to fight back. The entire process had happened so fast that he wasn't even sure about what had happened. He had only seen Feng appear before First Ghost suddenly before a blue flash had struck the assassin. In the next moment, First Ghost's HP had fallen to 0 and he died. Although Dark Eye had heard about Feng's strength while he had still been a member of Underworld, he had never realized that the man was this strong. The difference between his power and Feng's was overwhelming. He's insane. When First Ghost team members heard Feng's declaration, they felt the air around them grow heavy. They also felt a chill assault their minds. They could clearly sense the killing intent and determination Feng radiated. Feng was too scary. They were all very familiar with First Ghost's power. Even if all 100+ team members rushed at him as one, they would not kill the assassin. First Ghost would whittle them down and annihilate them eventually, yet such a powerful assassin hadn't even lasted one move against the swordsman. Moreover, they realized that should they make any sudden movements, they'd share their leader's fate. Team leader Restless, what do we do now? Several team members asked as they turned towards the cleric named Restless Death. Among these, Restless Death was only second to First Ghost in terms of strength. Normally, the cleric took command of the team when First Ghost was absent. We retreat, Restless Death said, clenching his jaw as he glared at Feng. With Feng here, he was not confident that they could kill Yulan and her teammates. First Ghost's death was the proof of this. Hearing Restless Death's decision, Underworld's members breathed a sigh of relief. If they continued this fight, not only would this swordsman before them annihilate every team member, but White River City's NPCs would also capture and jail them all. Following which, Restless Death and his teammates used return scrolls and departed from White River City. Chapter 1547, Feng's Invitation. Chapter 1547 Feng's Invitation. They're leaving? Dark Eye was dazed as he watched Underworld's members flee from the battlefield. With just a few words, Feng had sent over 100 of Underworld's experts packing with their tails between their legs. They hadn't even bothered to retrieve the equipment First Ghost had dropped. Dark Eye felt as if he were dreaming. Thank you, Yulan said as she walked up to Feng. Unlike Dark Eye, her enemy's response hadn't particularly surprised her. This is White River City. Naturally, I had to put a stop to this incident since I discovered it. Otherwise, no player would be willing to visit the city, Feng said, surprised by Yulan's gratitude. Although they had only met each other a few times, he could tell that Yulan was a relatively strong-willed woman. Despite the fact that Underworld hunted her, she refused to submit and delete her account. Guild leader Black Flame must be joking. Not every guild in God's domain has the courage to stand against Underworld and the Blackwater Corporation, Yulan said, shaking her head. She was honestly very thankful for Feng's intervention. Had Feng ignored the situation, she and her team would have been dead by now. They would have also lost a significant portion of their equipment. They would have had an even more difficult time dealing with Underworld's pursuit. May I know what you and your group intends to do now, Miss Yulan? Feng asked. He had witnessed Yulan's abilities personally in the past. Not only did she wield great combat power, but her management capabilities were also top-notch. That had been obvious when she had managed Overwhelming Smiles Trading Firm, growing it until the firm nearly rivaled the Candlelight Trading Firm. By the time he had rejoined God's domain, he had accumulated 10 years of experience in the game. If not for his Candlelight Trading Firm, Yulan's firm might have dominated Starmoon Kingdom. If he could convince Yulan to join the Candlelight Trading Firm, it would undoubtedly strengthen the trading firm. After all, Melancholic Smile was more suited to forging and not a particularly skilled manager. Moreover, to manage the Candlelight Trading Firm, Melancholic Smile had been forced to sacrifice her precious practice time. Hearing Feng's words, Yulan could not help but turn to glance at Dark Eye and the others. I had planned to complete a hidden quest I received and develop in a kingdom that lacks Underworld's influence, but I didn't expect the organization to discover us so quickly. They've even sent First Ghost after us. Since they clearly know where we are, we can't stay in White River City. How about joining Zero Wing? Feng asked, considering this an excellent opportunity. No matter how far you run with Underworld and Blackwater's information network, they'll have no trouble tracking you down. It is impossible to hide forever under black cloaks. God's domain has too many high-rank identification skills that can see through the black cloak's concealment effects. Join Zero Wing. Yulan was stunned. She could not help but stare at Feng, confused about the man's intentions. The Blackwater Corporation had already labeled her and her team as threats that needed to be removed. Any guild that discovered this would do its best to distance itself from them. Accepting them into its ranks would be the equivalent of declaring war on the Blackwater Corporation. First Ghost's death at Feng's hands could be understood as his way of protecting his guild's reputation. Blackwater might let the matter slide, but it would be a different story entirely if Feng offered them shelter. However, it would be an entirely different story if Feng were to shelter them. This would be no different than slapping the Blackwater Corporation in the face. The corporation would undoubtedly mobilize its forces against Zero Wing. At this point, the Blackwater Corporation was much stronger than when Abandoned Wave had annexed Ouroboros. Not only had its experts caught up with mainstream players' levels, but the corporation had also secretly purchased several guilds and workshops. It had even partnered with a few superpowers. Now, even super guilds avoided any confrontation with the Blackwater Corporation. Feng's proposal both surprised and excited Dark Eye and Yolan's other team members. To them, joining Zero Wing would be the best way to escape pursuit. Moreover, Zero Wing was famous for its collection of experts. The guild also had astounding growth potential. Zero Wing might even become a super first-rate guild in the future. That's right. If you join Zero Wing, I can at least guarantee your safety. Your previous efforts won't have to go to waste, Feng said, nodding earnestly. You know the consequences for sheltering us, right? Yulan had to ask. We're talking about Blackwater's vengeance. This is also a crucial time for Zero Wing. If things go awry, Zero Wing might lose its chance of becoming a super first-rate guild. Relax. There are plenty of superpowers that want to destroy Zero Wing, but isn't the guild still alive and kicking? Feng said, chuckling. Moreover, if you join Zero Wing, the guild will develop far more quickly. Currently, Zero Wing developed on 3 fronts: Starmoon Kingdom, the Black Dragon Empire, and Apocalypse Empire. Hence, it was in urgent need of manpower. Now that it had Zero Wing City to deal with, Feng couldn't manage everything on his own. Hence, Yolan's addition to Zero Wing would undoubtedly help both the guild and the trading firm's management. As for Dark Eye, Yolan's ally, the youth had great potential. Based on his fight with First Ghost, Feng knew that the Berserker was considerably talented. He only lacked combat experience. If trained properly, he could become one of Zero Wing's core combatants. I understand, Yulan said, smiling bitterly when she noticed her team members' anticipatory looks. In that case, we'll have to trouble you from now on, Guild Leader Black Flame. She had never thought that she would one day join Zero Wing, the guild which had been her enemy. However, she had to admit that she was relieved to join the guild. She only prayed that the Blackwater Corporation's fear of Zero Wing's potential would prevent it from declaring an all-out war on Zero Wing over her. Nonsense. Since you have now joined Zero Wing, the guild wouldn't let others bully you, Feng chuckled at Yolan's formality. Wait for me here for a moment. Once I've finished with my matters here, I'll bring you back to Zero Wing's residence to register. Of course, if you still have any matters to deal with, you can take care of them first. Once you're done, you can meet me at Zero Wing's residence. We don't have anything in particular to deal with right now. We're just waiting to turn in our quest. Unfortunately, Lady Celiora is still busy, so we have to wait until she finishes her task before we can hand it in, Yulan said, sighing helplessly as she turned to the smithy behind her. She was utterly helpless against Celiora. A Grandmaster Forger would be highly respected no matter where they went. Even Starmoon Kingdom's king had to treat the woman respectfully. Meanwhile, players could not afford to endure Celiora's wrath, so she had no choice but to wait until the woman stopped working before she could meet with the Grandmaster Forger. So, you're here to turn in a quest? Realization dawned on Feng. It was no wonder why Yulan and the others had been standing outside Celiora's house like a bunch of idiots. He then said, "Follow me then." Saying so, Feng approached the smithy, which emitted constant hammering sounds. Yulan and her companions didn't understand what Feng intended to do. When Feng knocked on the wooden door, they paled. They all knew about Celiora's temper. When they had interrupted the NPC earlier, she had used magic to reduce their attributes drastically for an entire day. Moreover, the debuff's duration only decreased if they were logged in. Under Feng's incessant knocking, the hammering sounds eventually stopped. Shortly after, Celiora slammed open the door, an enraged expression on her tanned face. We're doomed. Yulan's team began to regret their alliance with Feng. Just as Yulan thought that Celiora would dole out their punishment, something unbelievable occurred. However, the moment Silura's gaze found Feng, her wrathful expression softened. A joyful grin took its place. Why are you here? Chapter 1548, Forging Secret Journal. Chapter 1584, Forging Secret Journal. When Yulan and the others saw Silura's friendly expression, they turned to Feng in shock. Even Starmoon Kingdom's king had to treat Grandmaster Forgers respectfully. Trying to raise one's favorability with an NPC Grandmaster Forger was exceedingly difficult, yet Silura's reaction to seeing Feng wasn't unlike seeing an old friend who hadn't visited for many years. I found a treasure. I'm here to see if you can help me recast it, Feng replied. A treasure? Silura's eyes sparkled. Come in then. Right, these are my friends. They've completed a quest you've handed them, so they're here to hand it in, Feng said as he gestured Yulan and the others. Silura glanced at the players behind Feng and Yulan's group tensed. So, it's you guys. Come in as well then. I just so happen to need those materials, Silura said, nodding before leading everyone inside. As Feng stepped into the smithy, he was shocked by the sight before him. All sorts of exquisite weapons and pieces of equipment were on display in the relatively small house. Glass counters held various items that radiated powerful auras. Despite the magic array protecting the weapons, Feng could still feel a fraction of the energy they radiated. One could easily imagine how powerful these items were. The most inferior item in the house was dark gold rank, while most items were epic rank. Clearly, the weapons and pieces of equipment in the display cases were the creations Silura was proud of. They were top tier even among epic items. With a casual glance, Feng easily counted many times more epic weapons and equipment in Silura's small house than those Zero Wing had obtained. Even super guilds would go mad over Silura's collection. Feng had to admit that a Grandmaster Forger was amazing. Silura could craft epic items as if it were child's play. Even Master Forgers would be lucky to craft one epic item every few years. Although Master Forgers could craft epic items, their success rate was astoundingly low. Only if a Master Forger had an astronomical supply of high-ranking materials would they be able to produce epic items. Producing epic items was far more difficult than obtaining them from monsters and quests. This was because handcrafted items had higher compatibility with the players they were made for, which allowed said players to exhibit greater combat power. In God's domain, where fragmented legendary and legendary items were extremely rare, obtaining customized epic items was one of the few methods players in full epic gear could improve their combat power. The various large guilds in the past had even secured their own master forgers to craft epic weapons and equipment regardless of the cost. Lady Silura, here are the ebony stones and moonlight spring water you requested. After entering the smithy, Yulan proceeded to remove some materials from her bag. Feng was astonished when he saw the materials. Both the moonlight spring water and the ebony stones were super rare forging materials. The moonlight spring water could increase the mana within other materials, which in turn, increased the production success rate and quality of the final product. As for the ebony stone, it was a top-tier epic material only obtainable from high-rank field bosses and the dungeon bosses in 100-man team dungeons. Unfortunately, the drop rate was abysmal, and a team would have to kill multiple bosses before one would drop. Feng wouldn't have been particularly surprised if Yulan had revealed one bottle of moonlight spring water and one ebony stone. After all, Zero Wing had collected quite a few of these items. What shocked Feng was the number of items Yulan had revealed. In total, Yulan had taken out 100 bottles of moonlight spring water and 50 ebony stones. This already exceeded Zero Wing's stockpile by multiple times. Not bad. You actually gathered everything within a short time. After taking a look at the materials on the table, Silura took out a thick ancient book and gave it to Yulan. This is the forging secret journal I promised you. If one learns all of these techniques, they should have a much easier time becoming a master forger. A forging secret journal? Feng suddenly realized why the quest required so many precious materials. A forging secret journal contained plenty of forging techniques. It was a treasure that many forgers dreamed of obtaining. However, whether or not one could learn these techniques depended on the player's capabilities. Guild leader Black Flame, I still haven't thanked you for saving us. In addition, you've allowed us to join Zero Wing. As a show of gratitude, please accept this forging secret journal, Yulan sincerely said as she handed the forging secret journal to Feng. For a moment, Feng was at a loss for words. He could tell that Yulan was serious. Moreover, with Yolan's strong-willed personality, she would never accept owing others. "All right, I'll accept it." Feng nodded. The forging secret journal could definitely help the candlelight trading firm's forgers. He could also use the item as motivation for the firm's forgers. When Feng accepted her gift, Yulan breathed a sigh of relief. Her serious expression relaxed. After Yulan turned in her hidden quest, Siliora shifted her gaze to Feng and eagerly demanded, "Well? Come on. Show me this treasure of yours." Guild leader Black Flame, since you still have some matters to attend to, we'll wait outside. Yulan knew that Feng was here for something very important. It was most definitely a secret. Hence, she took the initiative to remove herself. "No need. This won't take long," Feng said as he waved a hand. Since Yulan and the others would soon join Zero Wing, he had to treat them like the rest of his people. Moreover, the disintegration armor was not something others could easily take from him even if they knew about it. Following which, he took out the destroyed disintegration armor and set it on the table for Siliora to inspect. The instant he revealed the disintegration armor, the space inside the room began to warp as a horrific killing intent and tyrannical aura surged out of the armor and filled the smithy. Immediately, several of Yolan's lifestyle players dropped to the ground, turning incomparably pale. "What kind of item is this?" A frightening shock tore at Yulan as she stared at the tattered armor on the table. After playing God's Domain for so long, she had seen countless top-tier weapons and pieces of equipment. She had even seen quite a few epic items. But none of those items came anywhere near to comparing to the tattered chest piece Feng had revealed. As she stared at the armor, she felt her soul tremble with fear. She felt as if she were looking at some horrifying creature rather than a piece of equipment. Even if she didn't know the item's identity, she knew that it must have an extraordinary origin. She was also certain that it was more valuable than any item she had. "What? This is disintegration power. Where did you get this?" Astonishment twisted Siliora's beautiful face when she saw the disintegration armor. "I killed an orc warlord and this dropped," Feng honestly explained. There was no need to hide information from an NPC. In fact, if he lied to Siliora, she wouldn't be able to determine the disintegration armor's specifics and wouldn't be able to help him. Moreover, his victory over an orc warlord was no longer a secret in Starmoon Kingdom. The various large guilds had long since learned about the incident. So, that's the case. No wonder this broken armor radiates disintegration power. It must be a piece of the Orc Empire's legendary disintegration set. After a glance at the armor and Feng's explanation, Siliora realized the disintegration armor's identity. "You really are something. The disintegration power radiating from this chest piece is incredibly dense. The disintegration power will taint anyone who carries it, yet despite being only a Tier 2 sword master, you haven't gone mad, only suffering some loss to your attributes." "Are you really just a Tier 2 sword master?" In response to Siliora's question, Feng merely revealed an awkward smile. He currently carried 3 fragmented legendary items. He also wielded one of the 10 Great Saint Legacies. He couldn't be considered a mere Tier 2 player. A Tier 2 sword master? He's a Tier 2 player? Hearing Siliora's question, Yulan and her companions could not help but turn to Feng, stunned. NPCs were not players. They generally didn't lie for no good reason. Moreover, they had much keener perception than players, not to mention an apex existence like a Grandmaster Forger. Chapter 1549, God's Power. Chapter 1549, God's Power. He's already been promoted to Tier 2? Realization dawned on Yulan when she heard Siliora's comment. It was no wonder Feng killed an expert like First Ghost with one hit. He had even dared to chastise and threaten Underworld's members. If Feng had truly reached Tier 2, he earned his arrogance. Tier 2 was the various large guilds' major goal right now. Only after players completed their Tier 2 promotions would they qualify to challenge level 50 super large-scale team dungeons, and Tier 2 players would significantly help a team when raiding level 50, 100-man team dungeons. Not only would Tier 2 players receive a massive boost to their basic attributes, but their skills would also undergo a qualitative transformation. One Tier 2 player could easily do the work of several Tier 1 players. As she watched Feng, Yulan found it hard to believe that he was already a Tier 2 sword master. As far as she knew, Even Underworld was still preparing for the Tier 2 promotion quests due to the high difficulty of these quests. Unless players made ample preparations, their chances of failure would be quite high. It was something to be avoided at all costs, as players would have to wait a considerable amount of time before challenging their quests again. The main god system intended Tier 1 to be an introductory phase for players, allowing them to adapt to God's domain's combat styles. Hence, every player would be capable of completing their Tier 1 promotions. However, it was a different story for Tier 2. Only after players had achieved a certain standard in both combat standards and basic attributes could they complete their Tier 2 promotions. Unfortunately, reaching level 50 required a lot of time and resources for current guilds, not to mention completing the Tier 2 promotion quests. In fact, even Super Guild's peak experts were still desperately grinding. These experts were lucky if they were already level 49, yet not only had Feng crossed the level 50 threshold, but he had also completed his promotion quest. So, this is the 31st ranked expert on the God's Domain experts list? Dark Eye was inwardly astonished as he examined at Feng. He had been considered a top-tier expert in Underworld. Although he was no match for experts like First Ghost, he was stronger than most of the organization's other experts. Even War Wolf had praised him for his potential. Yet, when he looked at Feng, he felt his horizons expand. In the past, he thought that experts like First Ghost were close to reaching the level of God's Domain's peak experts, but looking at it now, it seemed that that gap was far wider than he had imagined. When Dark Eye thought about how he could possibly receive guidance from an expert like Feng, he could not help his growing excitement. While these players digested their surprise over Feng's tier, Celiora used an identification skill, inspecting the disintegration armor on the table. It is no longer possible to repair this disintegration armor. The core magic circuits have been destroyed. The materials used to construct the armor have also been tainted and crippled by some mysterious power, Celiora said as she shook her head in pity. Then, can it be recast? Feng asked. Recast it? Celiora fell silent for a moment. It's not entirely impossible, but it is incredibly difficult. Only the disintegration armor's core is still usable. Everything else is useless. I'll need new materials to recast it, but obtaining those materials is beyond even a Grandmaster Forger like myself. Only by mobilizing an empire's power would you be able to gather all of the necessary materials. Are you really confident in doing something that would require the strength of an entire empire? Yulan and her companions gasped when they heard Celiora's explanation. The materials to reconstruct the disintegration armor were even out of reach for a Grandmaster Forger. Now they were even more curious about the disintegration armor's rank. Is there no other way? Feng felt his head begin to ache. Feng could easily guess that the materials Celiora had mentioned were likely rarer than legendary rank materials. Otherwise, there would be no need to mobilize an entire empire's power. Although Zero Wing was Starmoon Kingdom's overlord, it was insignificant compared to the kingdom as a whole, much less an empire. Not exactly. Taking another look at the disintegration armor, Celiora slowly said, there is the option of removing the mysterious power inside the disintegration armor. In reality, there isn't much of a problem with the disintegration armor itself. It's just that its magic circuits have been destroyed. However, a mysterious power is preventing the base materials from exhibiting their original strength. Now only the core remains untainted. If you can remove this mysterious power, the disintegration armor will be much easier to recast. What must be done to remove this mysterious power? Feng asked, breathing a sigh of relief. If the system really tasked him with collecting the necessary materials, it would take him longer than 1 or 2 dedicated years to do so. After all, even a Grandmaster Forger would struggle to collect all of these materials. If you wish to remove this mysterious power, you just have to use a stronger power to do so. Unfortunately, I'm helpless against this mysterious power. It's likely that only the legendary god's power will do the trick, Celiora said after giving the matter some thought. When she mentioned God's power, her expression became one of longing. Only Tier 6 gods could control God's power. Meanwhile, she was still far from becoming a Tier 6 god. In God's domain, countless emperors and peerless overlords had tried to reach that realm, including the disintegration armor's creator, the Orc Empire's founding emperor. God's power? Feng suddenly smiled. As long as I have God's power, I can remove this mysterious power. In the past, he had been ignorant about God's power. Now, however, not only did he know about it, but he also knew how to obtain it. To put it simply, the system wanted him to collect God crystals to cleanse the mysterious power inside the disintegration armor. Normally, it was very difficult to obtain God crystals, but after making a trip to the moon god's abode, he had a source. If he wished to obtain a large number of God crystals, he simply needed to visit places where gods had once lived. Although it was impossible to return to the moon god's abode in the dark canyon, he had a sealed tool, which could teleport him to a god's old residence. That item was Moloch's ring. Moloch's ring allowed him to open a gate of darkness that led to the Dark Den's central area, which happened to house the World Summit, a location the gods had created. Charlene had warned him not to use the Moloch's ring in fear of the power of darkness's taint, but after repairing the Bible of Darkness, he could reduce the power of darkness's erosion. If he only used Moloch's ring once, it should not cause too much of a problem. I've never tried this method before, so I can't guarantee that it will work, but it should be possible. If not even God's power does the trick, I'm afraid that nothing can cleanse this mysterious power, Celiora warned. Although Celiora was unsure, Feng could tell that he had a 90% chance of removing the mysterious power with the god's power inside God crystals. Otherwise, he'd have to collect the materials Celiora had previously mentioned, and that was impossible for current players. It was a far more reasonable task if he only needed to collect God crystals. Following which, Feng stored the disintegration armor and bid farewell to Celiora. He then led Yulan and the others towards Zero Wing's residence to complete the registration procedures. Due to God's domain evolution, the process of joining a guild had become far more troublesome. This was especially true for guilds with guild residences. Players who wanted to join such guilds needed to register at the residence or the Adventurers Association. It was no longer possible to accept an invitation from a person in power. As Feng made his way towards Zero Wing's residence, the sound of a system notification reached his ears. System, congratulations. Zero Wing City's basic facilities have been constructed, and its name is spreading throughout Starmoon Kingdom. Do you wish to allow NPCs to garrison in Zero Wing City? Chapter 1550. City opens. Chapter 1550. City opens. They're done already? Feng was a little surprised to hear the system notification. Normally, even after a guild city's construction finished, it would take a considerable amount of time before the city could be opened to NPCs. Only after NPCs could enter the city would it officially open to the public. NPCs were of utmost importance to a guild city's development. The sooner a guild could lure NPC residents, the sooner a city could unlock its various functions. He had expected to need a few more days before NPCs could conduct business in Zero Wing City. Immediately, Feng clicked agree, allowing the NPCs who had been attracted to Zero Wing City's scenery to enter the city. Shortly after Feng had done so, he received a call from Aqua Rose. Guild leader, for some reason, NPCs have begun to serve into the city. Many NPC merchants have even visited the city lord's mansion, requesting to purchase the city's shops. All of these requests have time limits. Should we approve of them all? Aqua Rose, who currently resided in the city lord's mansion, asked anxiously. This was the first time she had encountered such a situation. This had never occurred when she had managed Stone Forest Town, since all of the NPCs had long since secured their own shops. Her job had only been the player-owned shops management back at Stone Forest Town. Now that Zero Wing City was complete, every plot of land would become incredibly valuable. If they sold these lands to NPCs, they wouldn't be able to take advantage of them in the future. NPC merchants? Joyfully Feng answered, of course. Sell them the shops. The more the merrier. But before you do, inspect the NPC merchants' reliability ranks and products and compile a list for me. NPC merchants were essential to God's Domain's players. This was because NPC merchants sold many of players' daily necessities. Some even sold rare items that could not be found anywhere else. NPC merchants would also purchase miscellaneous items that players did not need. Once a guild city was complete, NPC merchants would come to the city to set up their own shops. However, the NPC merchants in guild cities weren't like those in NPC cities. Not only would they sell items similar to the latter, but they also offered certain special items. Unfortunately, there was a chance that these items would be counterfeits. Hence, when purchasing these special items, players had to rely on luck and foresight. The NPC merchants that worked with guild cities were also differentiated based on their star ranks. The higher a merchant's star rank was, the faster their shops could be promoted. Meanwhile, the higher a shop's rank was, the shop would have a greater variety and quality of items to offer. As these NPC shops improved, they would help stir a city's development and attract even more players and NPCs to the city. Hence, the various large guilds in the past had tried all sorts of methods to lure NPCs to conduct business in their cities. Feng had never thought that NPC merchants would seek cooperation the moment he allowed them to enter Zero Wing City. He had never encountered such a situation in his previous life. Even after Shadow had upgraded one of its advanced towns to a basic city, it had gone through a lot of effort to attract NPC merchants. Now, however, NPC merchants had already sought him out despite the lack of any promotional work. Is this a benefit given to the first guild city? Feng could not help but wonder. By the time Shadow had secured its first basic city in the past, many first-rate guilds had already secured intermediate cities. The super guilds had even been in the midst of upgrading their cities to advanced rank. Hence, Shadow's city had had many powerful competitors. On the other hand, Zero Wing City was the first player-constructed city in Starmoon Kingdom. It had no competition to speak of yet. Without any better options, it was natural that NPC merchants had flocked to Zero Wing City. After speaking with Aqua Rose, Feng hailed an advanced carriage and made his way to Zero Wing's residence with Yolan's group. There are so many people. When they alighted from the carriage and saw the long line of players outside the residence's entrance, Yulan was surprised. Thousands of players had lined up outside of Zero Wing's residence, and most of their standards were quite high. On average, these players were above level 40. There were even quite a few players in level 40 fine gold weapons and equipment in the queue. However, these players paled in comparison to the 100 Zero Wing members standing guard by the residence's main entrance. Every player in the 100-man team was level 43 or above. The team leader was even level 46. The most inferior piece of equipment these players wore was level 40 secret silver rank. As for the leader of the team, he wore a level 45 fine gold set equipment and carried a level 45 dark gold longbow. Surprisingly, despite being so well equipped, these players only wore Zero Wing's silver guild emblem, which denoted that they were elite members. They didn't wear the purple guild emblem for core members. These are merely Zero Wing's elite members? Dark Eye couldn't believe his eyes when he saw the level 46 ranger guarding the entrance. Even he was jealous of the ranger's equipment. Wearing a full set of level 45 fine gold set equipment was no different than having a full set of level 45 dark gold equipment. Dark Eye only had 4 pieces of level 45 dark gold equipment on him, while the rest was level 40 dark gold equipment. Unfortunately, level 45, 100-man team dungeons weren't easy to raid, and they dropped a limited amount of weapons and equipment. It had taken a lot of effort to collect the pieces he wore. The ranger had also reached level 46. In a first-rate guild, the ranger would definitely be an expert and given the position of a core member, yet in Zero Wing, the ranger only qualified to become an elite member. Yulan couldn't help her rueful sigh when she saw the elite team guarding the entrance either. Zero Wing was no longer the guild she had known in the past. With such foundations, it was no wonder why Feng dared to provoke the Blackwater Corporation. Ah! Another group of people who are dumbfounded by Zero Wing's equipment have arrived? How many is that now? Why wouldn't they be shocked? We're talking about level 45 fine gold set equipment. Even experts would be lucky to obtain level 45 fine gold equipment, much less level 45 fine gold set equipment. Level 45 fine gold set equipment would definitely be top-notch in other guilds and adventurer teams, but it's nothing in Zero Wing. I've heard that Zero Wing's core members can even purchase Tier 1 set equipment. Do you even know what a Tier 1 set equipment is? It's even better than level 45 dark gold set equipment. The Tier 1 set equipment is old news already. Based on what I've heard from Zero Wing's internal members, the core members are even allowed to purchase epic items. Quite a few are already sitting in Zero Wing's warehouse waiting for players to trade in their GCPs. What? Zero Wing is even offering epic equipment. Don't guilds usually assign such items to specific players? When the players in line before the entrance saw Dark Eye and his companions, they launched into a discussion about Zero Wing. Moreover, as they spoke, they become more passionate. Their conversations even caused the players behind them and passers-by to drool. Dark Eye's team, who overheard the conversations, were at a loss for words. They had assumed that they could easily become core members after joining the guild. After all, they had been considerably high-ranked experts in Underworld. But after seeing the level 46 ranger guarding the entrance, their confidence faded to nothing. "Let's head inside," Feng said, paying no attention to the players' conversations outside. As he approached the entrance, he revealed the black guild emblem reserved for Zero Wing's upper echelons. After a few hushed words with the level 46 ranger, he led Dark Eye and the others into the residence. When the crowd saw the cloaked Feng reveal a black guild emblem, they went into an uproar. A black guild emblem. That is one of Zero Wing's upper echelons. A guild emblem cannot be faked. That player is definitely a big shot in Zero Wing. I wonder who those people following him are? Could they be Zero Wing's core members? That's impossible. If they're core members, why don't they have guild emblems? They should be here to join Zero Wing. They seem pretty high-leveled and are fairly well-equipped. Those people sure are lucky. They actually know one of Zero Wing's upper echelons. They'll be able to join the guild without taking any tests. The waiting players couldn't help but envy Yulan and her companions. Shortly after Yulan and the others entered Zero Wing's residence, a stealthed assassin at the street corner revealed himself. This was none other than Third Ghost, one of the 7 ghosts Feng had clashed with in the past. Zero Wing actually dares to shelter Yulan's group? They aren't taking Blackwater seriously. Third Ghost sneered as he watched Yulan's group enter Zero Wing's residence. It seems that it's time to report to the higher-ups. Chapter 1551, God's Blood. Chapter 1551, God's Blood. Inside Zero Wing's resplendent guild hall. As soon as Yulan and the others entered the building, they were captivated by the scene before them. From the outside, Zero Wing's guild hall was no larger than the guild halls and superpowers headquarters. Upon entering the building, however, it felt as if they had stepped into an entirely different world. No matter how they looked at it, Zero Wing's guild hall was bigger on the inside. The first floor lobby was already the size of a football field. Quite a few guild members rested in the lobby and conversed, while several players queued up at the front desk to rent private rooms. A quest hall, which was even larger than the central room, was located beside the lobby. Many guild members occupied the quest hall as they searched for suitable quests to pick up. Specifications for high-rank individual quests and high-rank team quests were displayed in rotation on the large screens hanging from the ceiling, with a stupefying number of available quests. This is a 3-star guild residence? Yulan smiled bitterly when she saw the quest hall's large screens. Underworld had desperately tried to increase its guild popularity, yet despite its effort, its best guild residence only provided 500 to 600 high-ranked individual quests and 100 or so high-ranked team quests per day. With such small numbers, not even Underworld's core members were guaranteed to receive a high-rank quest every day. In contrast, Zero Wing was flooded with high-rank quests. Currently, there were over 2,200 individual quests and 400 team quests available. With so many, even the guild's elite members had an opportunity to pick up a high-rank quest. Unlike ordinary guild quests, which usually awarded coins, EXP and GCPs, players had a chance of obtaining rare items from high-ranking quests. Moreover, these quests offered a much higher monetary reward. Players could also help increase the guild's popularity. If Zero Wing had such a large supply of high-rank quests, it could develop more guild members. In the long run, the gap between Zero Wing's members and players in other guilds would grow. This is where you'll complete the registration procedures. You just need to register here and you'll become Zero Wing members, Feng explained as he led Yulan's group to the guild's registration counter. As for your rank, you'll all start out as normal members. You will then have to accumulate a certain amount of GCPs and pass the appropriate tests to rise through the guild's ranks. However, since I invited you personally, we can forego the required number of GCPs. We'll determine your ranks based solely on your performances in the test. To become an elite member in Zero Wing, you'll have to reach the early stage of the Trial Tower's 5th floor. As for becoming a core member, you'll have to reach the 6th floor's middle stage. Yulan and her companions gasped after listening to Feng's requirements. To ordinary players, a player would be an expert if they could reach the Trial Tower's 4th floor. If a player could reach the 5th floor, they'd be publicly acknowledged as an expert, yet Zero Wing required players to reach the 5th floor to become elite members. The requirement to become a core member was even more terrifying, actually requiring players to reach the 6th floor's middle stage. Even first-rate guilds' main force members would barely qualify to become Zero Wing's core members. Guilds handpicked these experts from their core members, yet this was the minimum requirement to become a core member in Zero Wing. Yulan and the others felt beads of sweat slide down their skin from the embarrassment. Among the dozen or so experts in their group, only Yulan and Dark Eye met the requirements. The rest of their group was slightly weaker, with the best among them having only reached the 5th floor's late stage. Guild leader Black Flame, what about lifestyle players? The dozen or so lifestyle player behind Yulan asked nervously. They were lifestyle players. Although some lifestyle players were acceptable fighters, these players weren't. Relax. There's a separate test for lifestyle players that join the guild. But that test is conducted at the Candlelight Trading Firm, Feng explained. The dozen or so lifestyle players breathed a sigh of relief. They were advanced lifestyle players that Yulan had nurtured. While they weren't good in combat, they were top-notch when it came to subclass standards. However, they nearly choked when they heard Feng's next words. 4 subclasses, those who have reached the advanced rank will become Candlelight's official members. To become a core member, you have to achieve a practical success rate of 30% with advanced items. In God's domain, advanced subclasses only had around a 35% theoretical success rate with advanced items. The practical percentage, however, was much lower. The majority of Yulan's advanced lifestyle players only had a practical success rate of 25%. Raising their success rates by even 1% would require refining their technique standards quite a bit, much less a 5% increase. Even Yulan was surprised. She felt that this requirement was a little too excessive. She was no stranger to subclasses. After all, she had been supervising the underworld's trading firms for some time. She had a relatively clear understanding of the present state of God's domain subclasses. The dozen or so lifestyle players who had followed her could rank among the top lifestyle players in Underworld in terms of production standards. They were only slightly weaker than the organization's top-ranked lifestyle players, yet in Zero Wing, they didn't even meet the requirement to become core members. Right, we just so happen to be running a performance assessment for alchemists today. If there are any alchemists among you that wish to participate, I'll take you there in a bit. If you rank among the top 10, you'll be promoted to a core member. If you rank high enough, you might even get to use a set of dark gold alchemy tools for a certain period. The chief alchemist will also have the authority to use a basic meditation room long-term. These benefits will definitely help you reach master rank. You'll also be able to visit Titan City, Feng said. When the group's lifestyle players heard this, a fiery passion ignited in their eyes. Unfortunately, few of them were alchemists. Otherwise, they would definitely compete in this assessment. In response, a white-haired elder stepped away from the group. He smiled at Feng and said, "This is interesting. May this old man participate as well?" "Master Aspiration is going to participate." Yulan gave the old man a confused look. Silent Aspiration was very famous in the virtual gaming world. While he had resided in Starmoon Kingdom, he had created the Fire Dragon Potion despite being an intermediate alchemist. The Fire Dragon Potion had allowed Overwhelming Smile to compete with the Candlelight Trading Firm. Silent Aspiration had long since become an advanced alchemist and was only a step away from master rank. Silent Aspiration wasn't normally interested in competing against others, yet this old man had actually asked to participate in this competition. His initiative had truly surprised Yulan. "MHM. Although Zero Wing has offered us shelter, we can't let them look down on us," Silent Aspiration whispered to Yulan as he nodded. "Of course. Once we've completed the test here, we'll head over to the Candlelight Trading Firm," Feng said as he looked at Silent Aspiration. He knew a little about this man, but although the man hadn't been particularly famous during God's Domain's early stages, practically everyone had known his name after 10 years. He had been a master alchemist and only a step away from becoming a grandmaster. More importantly, he had created the master-ranked potion that even grandmaster alchemists admired, God's Blood. God's Blood was why Silent Aspiration had become famous throughout God's Domain. It had been an incredibly powerful master-ranked berserk potion. In addition, God's Blood could stack with a berserk skill without side effects. Even super guilds had offered astronomical prices to purchase the god's blood recipe. Unfortunately, due to Silent Aspiration's strange nature, he had only sold one recipe in the past. Moreover, he only accepted alchemy tools and materials as payment. The various super guilds had competed over the recipe like madmen. After Yulan and the others revealed their system results for the trial tower, Feng led Yulan, Silent Aspiration, and the other lifestyle players to the candlelight trading firm. As for Dark Eye and the other experts, Feng sent them to join the 100-man expert team under Shadow Sword and Turtledove's leadership to grind for equipment in level 45, 100-man Hell Mode team dungeons. 10 minutes later, Feng's group arrived before the candlelight trading firm. The candlelight trading firm was housed in a much taller building than Zero Wings Guild Hall. One could say that it was the tallest player-owned shop in White River City. Since the teleportation fees between countries had fallen, an unprecedented number of lifestyle players visited the candlelight trading firm. The establishment's prosperity could now rival Starmoon City's auction house. After reaching the trading firm, Yulan and her companions discovered a large number of lifestyle players seeking to join Candlelight. Dozens of advanced lifestyle players had lined up to register for the trading firm's test. This had never happened in Underworld's trading firms. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.